Some people are on mute.
God, that's very scary image you have there. Do we really, David?
Oh, okay. That's what you were saying. I'm muted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we have a real face? If would that be, is that too much to ask?
No, it's not too much to ask. I'm very much looking forward to showing my real face in about 4 minutes.
Oh, okay. Oh, so you, okay. I mean, it's not quite Halloween yet, so.
Okay, so I was apparently speaking with my microphone muted. That's okay. I wasn't saying anything important. I was just saying, yeah, it looks like Rick is going to be a little bit late. He's our resident Greek expert, so he's the guy here. So until we get Rick in here, I just sent him a message. Any reactions to the essay? I thought it was pretty interesting. Any initial responses? Thought it was an interesting essay this week.
Are any and all comments acceptable?
Go right ahead.
I found you know how you're shopping for a blue car and all you see are blue cars, coincidence? Well, sorry, got it. One. Okay. Sorry about that. Coincidence. I am writing a children's adventure book. And one of the things I just finished writing and sent off to my fellow writers for their comments is a story about, there are two kinds of people. There's the people for whom you, as the story expresses it, you have to connect the dots. Not only do you have to connect them, you have to give the people the dots, make the connections, and then they follow them. Versus other people who you give them as few dots as possible, they make the connection, they can actually add other dots that make it more interesting. And then you have the third people who have the experience, but they have to think, and they have to have ideas about ideas, and they think about it. So it's this, how do I pick up knowledge? How much am I making? How critically do I look at it? Blah, blah, blah. It's for middle schoolers.
Yeah, kind of like personality typing.
You know, in this one very, very, very small slice of the personality of the characters in the book, yes. Yeah, actually, I mean, you could take a Myers-Briggs and, you know, probably do something with it. But, yeah, if you're really a lazy writer.
Well, they're all tools. Use the tools you have to the extent that they're useful. Yeah, humans are a multivariate phenomenon. We all have different backgrounds and education levels and personality types and areas of interest. they're all mixed together, aren't they? But I think that's a lot of what he's saying here. The Greeks had their ideas about character types and how humans correlate to that. And as Heraclitus said, character is fate. It's just the luck of the draw. Hmm.
I felt that somehow the essay was kind of went towards that the Greeks had a more secure universe or finite universe, and therefore their thinking was more unbounded, you know. And where we live where we think of an infinite universe, our thinking is more bounded. Does that make sense?
Uh,
I don't know if that's true. I'm just throwing that out as I was kind of reading through the discussion. I kind of got that impression, you know.
Yeah, I think. Well, when he talks about the place, I think he makes the idea in the Odyssey when he returns, you know, that one post of his bed, Odysseus, one post of his bed is a tree. It's
Right.
They use the tree as the post, one of the posts of his bed.
Mm-hmm.
The analogy, the metaphor there being, yeah, you are bound to a place and a location, no matter what you do. You're there, and that's an accident of birth, but there's no way of getting around that. And so, Kenneth talks a little bit about that we no longer feel that kind of binding to our place and our situation and our environment and our community. We move all the time, and it's a global world today that we live in. But clearly, the Greeks had the understanding that you have a fealty, you have an obligation to the place you're at. And that's lost today in our modern world. Yeah, modern space is the infinite and abstract space, indeed, of that Cartesian universe, a space within which we have no center, no firmament underfoot, no home. And that's just, a lot of the consequence of the modern industrial revolution, the age of scientific revolution, of the Darwinism and the geocentric model being replaced by the heliocentric model, and now there's no center at all. And it's just, the more we learn about physics and the cosmos, the less important mankind is. And that kind of throws a lot of our traditional, from the Greek standpoint and further back, a lot of the traditional ideas of tradition and family and community and neighbors and brotherhood, upside down. And we still haven't resolved these issues entirely, I don't think.
Right.
Well, he makes the point that that this kind of individualism, goes back to the kind of Cartesian subjectivity, right? The self is somehow a thinking self, above and outside of the world of, bodily sensational experience, right? And we're no longer connected to our natural environment, our world. We're a subject outside of the world, outside of nature. And this kind of breeds this kind of this foundation of individuality, as if you can be an individual without anybody else involved. You're not part of a social fabric. You're not part of an environment, right? You can be outside, and so you can do anything you want. The individualism that believes that you can just kind of plunder the environment and strip it of its resources and including the people with it, and that this is who we are, and we're we are a colonizing threat to the to humanity and the world. This is there's no stopping us as individuals. We have this ambition, to be the conquerors of the world, conqueror of dominating society, dominating not just society and other but the environment and the world, and making a mess of the world, which is why we have all these fires and hurricanes and leading to this, including the pandemic that we're in right now is because of this encroachment onto the natural environment and threatening the species that live in those environments, and and as a result, they're giving us their diseases. They have nowhere else to go but to spread it to us. Anyway, so I think it goes back to that kind of the history of that subjective, idea that we are transcendent subjects, that our true being is outside of this world. It goes back to maybe the Platonic idea of the forms. The true being that we are is understood by rationality, and that's who we really are. And the rest of the world, the transient world, material world, it's just a replica. It's nothing. It's really not important. It's not our true being. Right.
Right. Don't you think that it has to do with the belief of determinism in ancient Greek versus our belief now in, it's kind of an anthropomorphism, like you mentioned, belief that we control our lives, and not just our life, our appetite goes also to the planet, to other forms of life, to anything around us. And so we are like outside because we treat the ecosystem, we treat as an instrument to satisfy our appetite. With the determinism in ancient Greek also came a sense of duty that you, David, spoke about. The duty that is sacred and the duty that we are determined to have and to serve.
That's very out of fashion these days.
Yeah, I wonder when this magical thinking took hold. It's a Faustian idea, and it's partially true. Consciousness is some degree free. If you're at a choice and you're really, really ambivalent, this is Robert Kane's argument for free will. In cases of real ambivalence, if you really, really, really don't care between chocolate and vanilla, in situations like that, then it really is true that quantum events at the axon hillock can determine the outcome. So in situations like that, indeterminism is possible. But this is our God, this idea of the free ghost. And it's like, and Scientology really does a good job distilling this. They say that the whole idea of embodiment is like a satanic conspiracy to make you weak and a puss and passive, and that doctors, especially psychiatrists, with their interest in biology and neurology, are really, really demonic, because they're trying to trick you into believing that physical causes determine your will. And what could be more dangerous, right? Because if that goes, then morality goes, and religion goes, everything goes. Kant made the same argument. We need to preserve it. So we're the Faustian fantasists. We believe in the magical self. The self-help movement shows it. Christianity today is especially 100% based on those verses where Jesus says, if you believe with all your heart, and Hebrews 11, faith is the essence of things hoped for, the substance of things unseen. We really, in marketing, to sell these systems, you have to trick the person into believing that just by spending $19.95 plus shipping and handling, they can become a completely new person. Kierkegaard made fun of this idea also. So I think that's right. I think this is the age of we should really hate people who try to tell us that our wills are determined by physical causes. Because what's more demeaning than that? You're trying to say I'm made out of mud? And religious people use the same argument, right? That's why they hate evolution. You're trying to say I'm related to monkeys? They're machines. I'm not a machine, I'm a ghost, I'm a spirit.
Yeah, I think the Greeks had the idea that even the Olympian gods, even their Olympian gods, Zeus and Aphrodite, they understood that they were themselves subject to the authority of the natural world. Even they did not have dominance over nature. Nature ruled everything to the ancient Greeks. They understood that the natural world was in charge.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. Yeah, the distinguishing feature of Yahweh versus all of the other gods is that time and space and nature are after him. In Indian mythology and in Greek mythology, the cosmos is prior to these gods, which are subject to the laws. And in Buddhism, especially, the gods are in really bad shape. But in Judaism, what makes Yahweh Yahweh is that he's before nature. And we're made in his image. So we have 1 foot outside of nature. We have 1 foot in divine, complete, absolute fiat type freedom.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a dangerous philosophy or religion. Like a Christian religion thinks you're going to go to heaven or hell or something. But if you believe you're part of nature or in reincarnation or anything like that, you're not about to destroy your, physical environment, your natural environment. I think that's a part of the cause we're in today,
And that brings up that other famous passage from Genesis where we're supposed to be lords of the garden, and the garden is provided for our benefit. So meat eaters and Republicans use this verse a lot to say that, you're really a Satanist if you're trying to tell me I can't eat animals, because everything is here for humans' pleasure. Humans are like gods. We're God's stewards. And even other primates are basically meat for us.
Nothing much. I'm in a meet up. Can I call you back?
Well, I don't know. That's also kind of oversimplifying it. I think you can be in tune with nature, and I still think you can have any kind of religious predilection, Hindu, Christian, Jewish, and you can still be in harmony with nature. I don't think the one excludes you from the other, practically speaking. I think in general, the essay is talking about a loss of identity and a loss of belonging. And, people without religion, generally speaking, have a more pronounced lack of belonging and lack of context, and they go searching for it afterwards. I think that the essay is about losing that context and drifting and being confused, and religion and belief systems help us, ground us, give us communities to be a part of, to be accountable to, and that's something human beings need. We're social animals.
I disagree that all religions don't matter. And basically ideologies, because we're talking about the Greek mythology too, that they don't matter in human relationship to nature. We talk about ideologies, not about the interpretations, which could vary, you're right. But having been a student of the Old Testament and Genesis from the very beginning, I agree with what the previous speaker said. God has created, and it says it's very, very, very explicitly, the world and the animals for the pleasure of humans. And so the day after he created other non-human animals, I regard ourselves kind of animals too, and he expelled Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, Eden for non-compliance, and to provide them clothes instead of creating something. After all, he was omnipotent. He decided that they should rip the fur and the skins of the animals that he just created a day earlier. So, I mean, people usually, and I didn't think about it at the time, but ideas have a lot of influence, sometimes sublimate, on the mind and on an approach to the world. And that's the way we treat other animals and other life, is for our service. Now, why is that in the modern world, in the Western monotheistic world? And I don't know about Hinduism and Buddhism. That's probably, you're right about them. But monotheism claims that man is in the image of God, and that it's almost like God is in the image of man because he created the world for man. He was in the service of man in terms of doing all those things for humans to thrive. So, you know, it's a very twisted kind of look at God as a separate, bigger, and not in the service of humans, and certainly not in the image of humans, you know. But you see later in the Old Testament, at least, and that's where my knowledge is about. You see that God shows all the human weaknesses that one can have, from jealousy to a big ego to sadism and so forth.
And don't forget obedience. Obedience is very important for Yahweh. He's
number one.
No, he's very focused on it. And so, I mean, we made Yahweh that way because we understand what alpha males do. Alpha males are on top.
I gotta disagree with you guys. I thought this was about Greek philosophy. Are we gonna have a religious conversation about the pros and cons of Christianity? I'm confused now.
Well, it's really,
We're all gonna disagree on that, I think, depending on our life experiences, I think. I don't think that's what the essay is about, though.
Well,
The essay is about a loss of belonging and context, and individualism destroying who human beings are. It has nothing to do with which religion is good and which religion is bad, and are people more evil or not evil, or is God our creation, or did we create God, or did God create us? That's not what the essay is about.
Right.
Well,
We're talking about how, you know, how our ideologies that we believe in has led us astray from the Greek, this idea of the Greek way of life that he's talking about. And so, you know, the different religions and atheism or whatever nihilism that is controlling our you know, our minds today is sort of relevant. But you know, I wanted to ask, how do you distinguish an ideology from ideas that can, you know, enhance your understanding?
I mean, I know friends who are atheists who their ideology and their religion is science. Anything can be your religion. Science can be your religion. You worship whatever you want to worship as the truth. We don't know how machines work, and you trust you're being told the truth. You trust you know how energy is transformed into electricity or whatever. That's faith. We all take things on faith, not just people who believe in God or the Old Testament. We all practice our lives on faith, on, you know, mechanistic things. We don't understand how they work. So that's a common thread through all humanity, the faith in things you do not understand. You can call it science, or you can choose the Old Testament, or you could choose the Bhagavad Gita, or you could choose whatever you want. This is talking about a lack of social well-being and individualism destroying our social fiber and our thread and our connectedness to community. That's what I'm getting out of the essay.
At the risk of,
Everybody creates their own religion. I know people who are in love with science. They're not scientists. They never got a PhD in biology, chemistry, biochemistry, or physics. And yet everything they read, they trust to be true based on faith. That's a
Shreni, this is also not the article.
I'm just
but
saying that's where
I know you're just
gone on a
saying.
tangent. We've gone on a tangent about the Old Testament.
Okay, so to go on a tangent on what you, on a remark about faith, that everything is faith, science is faith, there's a big difference between the word religion and the word science. Science is trust in conclusions that are based on research, on studies, on some rigor, and they are always probabilistic, but there is a degree of probability because that's how we act in life, is according to probability. Nothing is for sure, but we have to move from A to B. Faith in religion is blind, and it is not conditioned on facts. That's all I wanted to intrude. I hope that it didn't offend you this time.
I think it would be to include religion under the rubric of sociology. I mean, that's how I was doing it. I wasn't bashing any gods. I was looking at cultural thematics. And sometimes you have to include religion when you're talking about culture.
Yeah, I think we have to include everything that we choose to believe in to guide our lives and give us our values.
But some people really believe in God, and for those people, their belief would affect their culture. That's all I was. That was my big premise.
The same people who believe in science, their belief affects their culture too.
Yeah, yes, that's right. Yes, that's right.
It's obvious, I guess.
Yeah, but the topic was, how do you create humans that are so willing to unplug themselves from the matrix of nature and interaction with each other? And what might help that would be a role model that makes that noble or heroic or good. So I think the way you depict your God would affect your self-image and your ideal self-image. And so Yahweh's character is different from other characters, and that's reflected in, uniquely, this idea that God is completely outside, beyond, and transcendent of nature. And that's not God badging. That's making a distinction between Yahweh and other gods.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's a specific religion, and that's one interpretation of the religion. There are lots of people who would have a different interpretation of that. Like that's one way of looking at it, for sure.
Oh, no one would do that. I mean, this is how, the makers of the religion defined their God that way. Nothing is more important to Jewish Orthodox interpretation than the idea that God is before nature. This is non-optional for Judaism and Christianity and Islam.
Okay, I just don't think it means you are completely outside of nature and disconnected, and there's this other thread of domination is bad and it's leading to destruction. And I think these are all just opinions. I don't know how that came. I don't see that out of the essay. I think the isolationism that people feel, they don't have religion, they don't have community, they don't interact with others. There's nothing holding their relationships together, and they're in isolation, especially now more than ever with viruses and social distancing rather than physical distancing and everything being remote. We are isolated human beings dying of depression because we have no social context to live in. And I see it all the time. People are dying of disease and loneliness, right? Because they don't have the social context they need. Religion happens to provide that for a lot of people. It provides them with social context. Most Jewish people I know are secular, but they love following the law. They love going to temple. They love the community because it gives them the social context they need.
Yeah, I'm Korean, and it's the same thing in Korean churches. It's like almost the entire function of going to the church is to meet a spouse, to make friends. It's primarily a social function. I agree with that. But I wasn't talking about that. I wasn't bashing religion. I was talking about the relationship between metaphysics and culture.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Scott, could I ask you a question, Scott?
Uh-huh.
Did you say you're Korean?
Well, honorary Korean, yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. Oh. Well, I'm actually from Korea, so.
Oh. 안녕하세요.
네, 안녕하세요. Yeah, I mean, when you have a face, the kind of face you have, I don't know why you would ever want to upload that other thing that you had initially.
Although, yeah, your camera's
uh,
off skew.
Yeah. That's my religion. I'm kind of.
Can I jump in here? Can people hear me? Am I unmuted or not?
You're here, Philip. Go ahead.
I'm here. Okay. I'm new to the group. I've been listening for a while. I don't have the visuals. I have some problems with my eyes, so I didn't bother with the visual stuff. Can I comment on some things people have said? First of all, one person was claiming that science is yet another form of religion. I agree that it can function that way for people, but I think it's important to remember that science is a methodology, not a bunch of content, right? And I agree that it can be treated as just a set of statements that people accept on faith, but at its core, it doesn't have to be that. I mean, you can go to the lab and look at the experiments. I mean, like if you were to chop wood, you wouldn't accept it on faith that it works. Like if you chop wood and you actually now have two smaller pieces of wood, whereas before you had one big piece, you don't say, oh, well, I guess it's faith. I just have to accept it on faith that I have two smaller pieces of wood. No, you've got real knowledge there. And science can be that if you put the time in to actually study it and look at the experiments. Although I fully agree that it's often treated that way. That science is often functions as a faith for people. It certainly doesn't function that way for me. I mean, I take the time to learn it. And the other thing is, there's a bit of a history in the last 200 years of people feeling a lot of nostalgia for the Greeks and their sense of unity, and I certainly feel that. But we should be suspicious of that. I mean, a philosopher like Martin Heidegger also felt suspicion for that sort of, nostalgia and love for that sort of unity, and it did lead him into Nazism. So we do have to be careful about that kind of nostalgia for the Greeks.
I agree, and just want to add about science. The problem with what happened to science is that it became totally politicized. It's a club, it's a tool, just like you say, and because it's such an important tool, especially now in the time of the sixth extinction, it is owned by politicians and has been bastardized. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who else has a scientific background. I think the speaker before you seems to. And I mean, I have a degree in biology with a minor in chemistry, and I went to medical school and I studied a ton of biochemistry. And there is some very clearly data-driven information, and there is a huge body of consensus opinion, and there's a huge body of theory with zero evidence for that people just agree that it makes sense. It's just their opinion, and they're experts, so they're allowed to have that. And we could always go into examples another time. I'm going to say it's split. There's real lab science out there, and then there's a whole other body of not lab science out there.
I don't know. I read a lot of stuff.
Just one example of the faith-based science you're talking about?
It's hard for me to remember right now, but a lot of papers I read where things have not been, there haven't been the experiments. It's based on the consensus of experts, blah, 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 blah. And it's often in medicine. I think bench work is, the real, like, in the Petri dishes and the actual, what are you testing for? What are you growing? How do you measure it? But when you take it to the macro level, not all of that micro bench science, there's not enough sometimes to support what's happening at the macro level. So it becomes very expert driven. Give me time to think and I'll try to come up with a specific medication or something that gets value that has no proof of benefit. But
how would that distinction work inside the sphere of religion? How would the lab versus opinion distinction work?
Well, no, I'm saying that there's probably mostly opinion, but people also experientially probably can feel like they can back up their opinion with their expertise, just like some scientists can. I don't think it's that different.
Okay, so that's an aberration of science.
It's very common.
Yeah,
I think
well,
I think
you know, big pharma has, you talked about medical research. Big pharma funds a lot of the medical research, and they are private, they are for profit. That's capitalism. It's an aberration of science. It's abuse of science. Yeah, that happens.
I think we can get at the science-religion distinction by not focusing on content, but focusing on methodology. Like if there's a religious dispute, there really isn't a well-established methodology for resolving that dispute. It's more like literary criticism. You talk, you come to understand each other. I'm not criticizing that, although I'm not religious myself. But when it comes to science, there actually is a methodology for resolving it. I agree it's not followed always properly. It may be impossible to follow it properly, and it may take years and years, but it does happen. Like there's a book I'd recommend, The 7 Deadly Sins of Psychology, that talks about mathematical mistakes made in psychology experiments. But notice what's happening is that book is written by a scientist. He's applying science to make science better. And that's very different from, like, I'll just stop there and let people respond to that.
Okay, so the only thing that comes up for me is there's a lot of scientific papers that I have to read that are very driven by statistical differences, right? So, you have to be you have to have a really, really good sense of either statistics or know how to get through. Are they skewing the data or are they not skewing the data? Are they saying there's a power difference or a statistical difference that's big enough to show this drug made a difference versus placebo or not? And there are a lot of, you have to be like, the level of expertise sometimes that's needed to discern the not so great data. Maybe this is tangential, maybe this doesn't answer the question, but versus the stuff that's real is, when you're feeding this to the public, they don't know the difference. They trust that science is science, and it's not like that. It's just
Right,
very nuanced and textured, and it's driven by statistics usually, not even, and that can be played with.
Yeah, I mean, I happen to really like the mathematics of statistics, and that what you're saying is just to say that science is hard. It's not to say that it's faith at its core. Like in religion, there is no level of learning you can acquire that will actually let you resolve religious disputes, where in science there is. And I agree it's hard, and I agree it's unfair, and it's discriminatory to people who don't have the time or resources to learn the methodology. But science can be done well. And, anything can be done badly. Like pointing out when science is done badly is trivial. I mean, I can build a house really, really badly and then have it fall down, but that's not an argument that houses can't be built well. So what I'm saying is science can be done well, and religion in that sense, if you want to acquire truths, it can't be done well. If you want to interpret and, shape your community, yes, religion can be done well. So I take it all of your arguments are just an argument that science is hard, not that it's a religion.
You are absolutely, let me just interject. You are right, it is hard in one way, and you're not the only scientist here. I have a PhD in social science. So I remember that many of the constructs that I had to use in research, what I did, I searched for their validity and reliability. I searched for peer-reviewed journals only. And so it's a cumulative knowledge. It's very hard science because it has a lot of information and data. So it's accumulative. And once something has proved to be valid, then you don't have to research and study it again. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's how it works. And you're right, it works on proximities, it works on probabilities, but that's, at least it's something to hold on to.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to compare science and religion. I think what happened was the essay is about the Greeks saying that humanity has lost its sense of context, purpose, and social structure. And then the conversation moved on to religion somehow. And now I'm just saying that in my experience of all of the non-scientific people I know, science has become religion for them. And maybe it's for the reasons you say. Maybe they assume there's a methodology. Maybe they assume it's done well, but they treat it like their religion.
I agree with that. I agree with what you just said. And I think it's tragic because, I mean, science governs our lives so much. And when it comes time to voting or, other democratic ways of making decisions, realistically, what percentage of the population really understands science? And therefore, what percentage is in a position to make science-based voting decisions? It's kind of terrifying.
Yeah, exactly. It just goes back to I do think that humanity needs social context, and we need communities, and we need neighborhoods, and we need to be accountable to our neighbors, and we need belief systems that we share. That is how human society works. That's how we thrive. That's how we do well. And it's lost in the Western world. I don't know about the rest of the countries out there, but especially in the US, it's going down the toilet, basically. And it is sad.
I mean, people I know who dispute that science is valuable, I often just, they say, well, how can you break out of this idea of that science is just faith? And I say, well, mix baking soda and vinegar, watch it fizz. Read a bit about that. I feel like when people try to learn about science, they want to start with something big like quantum mechanics or something like incredibly hard. And then it starts to feel like religion because it's based on faith. And I say things like, well, chop a piece of wood in half, you just accomplish something real in the real world. Mix vinegar and baking soda. Start with things that are small and learn those and build up from there. And then it doesn't feel like a faith-based thing.
Right. I mean, I remember when I was an undergrad studying biology, when it was like microevolution and mutations in the genetic code leading to different amino acids, and that's measurable. I was like, that sounds like it makes sense. When it got to genetic drift and Darwinism, I just remember sitting there at 19 years old, that kind of sounds like a lot of theory and opinion and not a lot of real evidence. That's just what I remember as an undergrad. I'm like, when it was down to biochemistry, cell structure, enzymatic reactions, that's real data. Then when you get to this sort of macroevolution and genetic drift, it's weak. There's no data behind it. It's just an opinion.
I don't agree, but I think it would take us too far off the topic. You can model that stuff in computers and really get a sense of how it works. But I think that might take us too far off our topic.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Is anybody else concerned about the path that the Nazis took? Because they also had this love of a unified society that would be somewhat, in their twisted sense of what nature was, that would be in harmony with nature. And a lot of very smart people like Martin Heidegger got caught up in that. And I don't want to let him off the hook. I said that wrong. He didn't get caught up in it. He was fully actively engaged in driving it forward. Is anybody else concerned that the West is not especially good at a return to nature? We don't have a good track record of trying to create a unified, holistic society that's connected to nature. I mean, the Nazis are one attempt at doing that, and it was a disaster.
I think it's a remarkable interpretation of the Nazis to think that they wanted to get into harmony with nature. They wanted to dominate it and show that man is above nature and controls it and utilizes it, which is the opposite of getting in harmony with nature.
And what's the difference between that, Nazism, so many years ago, and what the American colonies, the colonists, settlers, did to our native, residents, of this continent? That you don't consider that genocide? On the par with what the Nazis did?
Certainly, the Nazis saw a lot in common with the United States. There's this interesting articles. You can Google this stuff. Hitler grew up on reading these novels of the Wild West that were written by a German author who idolized, the settlers and the cowboys, and the idea that civilized people need to expand into less civilized areas and use them like resources. That all those Native Americans and their land were just fodder for the mill of advanced industrialization. And Hitler wanted to do the same thing with the Slavs. He wanted Eastern Europe to be his frontier, and he dreamed of being, sort of a modern industrialized cowboy who would take over the land and process it industrially. And he even required his soldiers to read these novels, these childhood novels, because they were so influential on him. Now, it's, not surprisingly, in America, we don't prefer to tell that part of the history about how his concentration camps were his attempt to recreate U.S. Indian reservations, made up of Jews and other people.
Yeah.
Has anyone ever read that Nazism came from the left? I've read different things, that it was right wing, but then I've read other things that it was left wing, that it came out of this leftist socialist sort of offering some equality to the Germans who were poor at the times, coming back from World War I. I don't know if anyone has an opinion on that.
All three responses to the Great Depression were leftist, meaning that they were Keynesian attempts to intervene with the free market economy. So FDR, Stalin, and Hitler, they all did the same thing. They realized the free market doesn't work. The Great Depression was a crisis of overproduction. The workers weren't being paid enough to buy the garbage they were making. They were burning fruit and vegetables by the mountain using gasoline. You see in those photos. So the government had to intervene, and so that would be socialist. When the economic system doesn't work and you don't want people to starve. If you don't care about starvation, then that's a good, healthy right-wing approach. But if you don't want people to starve, then you have to intervene, then you have to redistribute things, and you have to manage things. You can't let the market take care of, food distribution and the post office and stuff like that. So those would all be left-wing responses.
That's a remarkable interpretation. I mean, what did Benito Mussolini say fascism was? He said it's when governments and corporations work hand in hand. When the government begins to serve the interests of corporations so perfectly, then it's fascism. And fascism is the definition of the right wing. So this is where we get into the problems with using left and right as metaphors for politics in the modern world. It's like I think they applied pretty well to the tennis courts in the French Revolution, when some of them were sitting on the left side and some of them were sitting on the right side. We could say, well, here's the left wing and here's the right wing. But ever since then, we've attempted to apply that to any and everything, to the point where it can even seem to us as though, perfect fascism to as far right as you can go, according to the metaphors, is nevertheless left because of the way that we define things. I just find sort of the problem with left and right is the idea that human politics can be abstracted accurately as a zero dimensional points, left and right, or as a one-dimensional line between 2 points. It seems to me it's more like dozens and dozens and dozens, maybe thousands of dimensions. And our attempts to keep projecting it down into this sort of simple left and right thing is what trips us up.
Yeah, they started as social democrats, but that was used as a slogan. Again, the slogan didn't hold water. The problem with the Nazis were not return to nature, was the authoritarianism that was so embedded. And the only return to nature maybe was the idea that power, the bully wins. It was a Nietzschean interpretation. And because in the animal world, the way they interpret it, it's not true, by the way. There is not a lot of altruism among other animals, but they saw power as the main force, as the justified and legitimation of all. And that was where their understanding of nature really ended.
I'm not suggesting they had a correct understanding of nature. I'm suggesting that if you actually read like Nazi intellectuals, and it's, it makes me feel a bit queasy to put those two words together, but there were some extremely smart people, Carl Schmitt, Martin Heidegger, who, very smart people who liked Nazism, and they also read the Greeks. I mean, there were poets like Hölderlin, who used to praise the Greeks, and a lot of people Germans who liked Nazism would refer to Hölderlin and this sort of return to the Greeks. So I'm certainly not suggesting that they had a correct understanding of nature, but they did see it as a return to nature. And, you know, just one example, they felt that it was natural for human beings to be happier in hierarchies. They thought that human beings were happier if they knew their place in the pecking order. I don't agree with that, but, you know, that was an understanding of nature that the Nazis had, and they were explicitly trying to return to nature. You can't deny that.
By the time, the problem we get into is by the time by the time you take people at their own word, and that you agree to interpret the world the way that they saw it, then you end up with a problem in comprehension, because what distinguishes all these different worldviews is that they take the same terms and use them to mean completely different things. And so we have to be able to distinguish between, were they returning to nature, or were they returning to what they decided nature was in order to justify returning to it. So for example, you know, is nature a bunch of hierarchies in which the bully always wins? Is that how nature actually works? Or did they project their own philosophy onto nature in order to say, now we are returning to nature, while perhaps subverting nature because of the nature of the way that they saw nature? Nature is such a fun word in English, right? How many different things does it mean? But I mean, when people talk about the Nazis and hierarchies and whether nature works that way, which is a common theme among people who try to defend that particular ideology, one of the questions you can ask yourself, you know, use as an example, is how many people still believe in the alpha wolf? You know, you've seen the refutations of the theory of the alpha wolf. All the experiments that seem to show that wolves have an alpha wolf and that their packs are organized that way were all bullshit. It was all crap, and it's all been discredited. But if you look around in society, how many people still talk about alpha wolves? Oh, I'm an alpha male. I wouldn't want to be a beta cuck. You know, there's all this terminology based upon what turned out to be bad science, bad experiments, and the reason that the original investigators discovered, right? You know, the hierarchy and wolf packs and the alpha structure is because that's how they saw the world. And so they arranged experiments in completely unnatural settings where the wolves could not engage in their natural behavior, and then declared that the artificial results were actually how nature worked. So I find myself, like Kenneth Smith, I go back to William Blake over and over and over. You know, as a man is, so he sees. And so you can't take people at their word when they try to tell you who they are, what they believe, how the world works. So they're projecting everything onto it. You're getting multiple layers of reinterpretation and warpage.
Well, what's that effect called? That something you observe changes by the very fact that you observe it. The something effect. I can't remember now. I was hoping one of you knew. It's that
Heisenberg principle.
Like you cannot observe something objectively, because just in your observation you have changed the phenomenon for which you're observing.
Yeah, that's the Copenhagen interpretation. But if you want to apply it to consciousness, that's Eugene Wigner. That's right. Yeah. What can it even mean to say go back to nature? Because if nature is quantum reality, then what are we going back to? Some non-local, impossible, mystical unity? And what about animals that share and they live a communal, cooperative existence? Why isn't communism going back to nature? Why does it have to be this fantasy of alpha domination? So nature, I think, it can mean anything. We're used to the Nazis doing the Hölderlin, blood, soil. Humans need concreteness, locality, and the tribe must be kind of race-based. You know, these good biological ideas. Yeah, that could mean nature, but nature could also be this non-local, mystical, quantum, you know, Leary acid type thing, or it could be a billiard ball, atomic nothing thing like Hobbes. Yeah, going back to nature means nothing.
Well, I think it really means that you know, your understanding of life is that you know, it's about your origins. You know, where do you come from? Or does your mind or your culture come first before nature? You know, because it seems like you have it backwards. Even if it's true that you can never go back to nature, but you have to recognize the you know, the truth value of the understanding that you know, we are, you know, in the context of nature. It's not nature in the context of our culture that we are, you know, living, you know. You're right. Nature comes first.
That's right, but then we have to fill in nature with some type of meaning.
Right.
When you try to make nature mean something, then you get in trouble because then you're stuck with your local cultural current understanding of nature.
No, you can go back to certain philosophies that have that kind of understanding, like the idea of the yin yang and Taoism in ancient China. About the same time that Plato, developed his philosophy. The idea of Taoism specifically talks about our life in the context of a natural world, and there's a kind of idea that there is a being that is the creative source of who we are, which is the Tao, and that kind of. So there are other philosophies that have that too, from India and so forth, where the religions recognize that the God is not out there or up there, but it's within us. It's inside of our nature, and we are inside nature.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I think the best example of the lack of separation in terms here is Spinoza and his pantheism. That nature, we are a feature of nature. Nature is everything. They called it God too. That was another name for nature at the time. But it's everything. We are inseparable. We are natural beings.
Right. And by writing that essay, and he was excommunicated from his community, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious, how do wolves actually organize? Do you know? How do wolves actually organize if they're not?
They're kinship groups. The kinship groups. The oldest bonded pair, takes care of their various descendants and cousins. And whenever the pack gets too big, or some wolf decides, actually, I'm not all that comfortable with this, they don't challenge for dominance and then, possibly win or submit, all that Nazi crap. What they do is they say, okay, I'm going to go off and form my own pack. That's what wolves do. They stay together when it works, and they separate when it doesn't. Generally, the elders are respected because they know where to find the food and what's going on. I mean, it's sort of like they have a sort of common sense arrangement, but you wouldn't know that from the way people talk about alpha wolves. And of course, the whole reason they talk about alpha wolves is they're trying to justify why they bully and dominate other human beings. And they're saying, see, the wolves do it. I'm just being natural. This is that problem. Any epoch or culture is partly characterized by how it defines what is it to be human, what is it to be divine, what is it to be natural, and then arranges the three things into some sort of set of relationships with each other. And that particular intersection, that kind of triune lens for looking at the world and at the self, every culture does it differently. Every epoch does it differently. And so when they open their mouths and begin to tell you, well, this is what nature is, or this is what human is, or this is how I'm going to relate the human to the natural, they can't possibly be talking about reality. They're talking about themselves and how they see the world, but they're talking about it in terms of the belief system they already have, which means when anybody else tries to understand them, we have this massive communication problem. Just like they're saying something fundamentally alien from what it sounds like they're saying, which we would know if we were enmeshed inside of their culture long enough to get it. And if then we could step outside their culture to an Archimedean standpoint and observe it from the outside and go, oh, that's what they meant. But from any one perspective, it's just not possible to get enough triangulation to figure out what anybody's talking about on these issues.
A lot of social animals, they change their social structures a lot based on circumstances. Jane Goodall accidentally created an unusual situation. She had a huge cage full of bananas, and the chimps were able to see these. And a lot of Jane Goodall's results, there's no criticism of her. I mean, she made perfectly reasonable assumptions, but by having this huge cage full of bananas that the chimps could see, the chimps stopped being very cooperative. She created sort of billionaire style capitalism, right? There was this big pile of bananas, all the chimps wanted them, and cooperation broke down. So a lot of Jane Goodall's early studies about how chimps were aggressive and would fight each other are the result of this big humongous pile of cash basically just sitting there where all the chimps could see it and could want it. So, I mean, something like human nature can change a lot under different circumstances. I mean, I feel like in a more egalitarian society, nobody would have voted for somebody like Trump. But in a situation of scarcity and panic and fear, some people find an extremely confident, aggressive person like Trump very appealing.
Well, he's very appealing for a lot of reasons. But I wanted to say one thing about nature, like lions freak me out. Lions, everything I've ever watched about lions is the male comes in and murders the young that he didn't father. The females do all the hunting. And I'm like, that is the weirdest social structure in the animal kingdom I'm aware of. I don't get it at all.
I agree. Never thought about it, but I instantly agree.
Yeah. You just watch any kind of safari. It's always about the lions and the females doing all the hunting, doing all the work, having some young that they had by another lion. The new lion comes along, murders those, and makes her, when she goes in heat, to have a litter that he spawned. And it's just wild to me that that's a natural, that's how they live. That's how lions do it.
It's kind of a human deadbeat.
Yes. The male lions are very pretty and sort of just hang out. Look how pretty I am. So go kill
around.
So how does a male lion know that offspring is not his? How does he know that?
I mean, I'm assuming he just met her with her offspring and murders them, and then
that's how it works.
She goes in heat. He mates with her.
Yeah, so it's the point you're making is really, really important here. It's trying to talk about what's natural in abstracto. What did Hegel tell us? To be abstract is to be in error. It's like when people try to tell you there's a Native American saying, or this is what Native American culture is. It's like there were hundreds of cultures in the Americas. There is no Native American saying or Native American culture any more than there is this is the way that nature is. It's like, well, what is each species like? What are the different ecosystems like? It is a polyperspectival, dependent kind of thing where everything is adaptive and different in different places.
Right.
That's right. And that's why we should be careful about turning one aspect or one behavior of a certain life form into a model that, as if the model is prescribing what reality is for us in a static way. I see Jordan Peterson does that. He bases a whole theory, a whole model of relationship between men and women on the lobster.
Right. And it's wacky because, on the one hand, is he even interpreting it right to begin with? How much is he projecting the film in his head onto the things that he's seeing? But even if he did, the way people choose their examples in order to claim nature gives me the authority to do this because look, I found these creatures crawling on the bottom of the ocean that behave like this. So therefore we have to behave like that. It's just as weird as, putting a bunch of strange wolves that don't know each other into a cage, subjecting them to harsh circumstances that makes them extremely uncomfortable, observing their behavior and then saying, behold, this is how nature is. And therefore I need to beat you guys up and take all your money.
There's a wonderful book called Real Nature, REEL, and it's basically like a sociologist looking at how nature films are made. And basically the filmmakers can just sit around for, weeks while the lions or whatever are lazing about. And then as soon as the lions do anything aggressive, then the filmmakers get all excited and they start filming. And as a result, we have a lot of nature films full of all this aggression and violence in nature. And I live out in the middle of nowhere. I've probably had more than 25 encounters with bears in my life, and it's fine. They're not, they're just doing their thing. Like if you surprise them, it's a problem, but not much of a problem. And if you just run into them, I go my way, they go theirs. Not a problem. But you'd never know that from nature films.
Right. Because you don't look like a bush full of berries and you don't look like a salmon. So, what's the point? They're like,
One time a bear charged me from about 25 feet away. That was the only time in, many, many encounters with bears. And I did the thing of just backing away, putting my arms over my head, looking to the side. Because if you look in their eyes, they interpret that as aggression. If you look too far away, it's cowardice. So you want to look halfway in between. Not aggressive, not a coward. The bear charged me, stopped 2 feet away from me, sniffed, and walked away because I wasn't tasty to a bear. So.
Yeah, people don't.
You're like,
So did you look 45 degrees to the side or 90?
2 feet to the side of the eyes is how I do it. There's different opinions about that, but.
So when you go in the bush, you better put your deodorant, right? That might
Well, I'm always in the bush. I live out in the middle of absolute nowhere.
There were these, did you ever watch these these weird chimp nature shows where the whole clan brutalizes and murders one chimp? Have you seen those? And they're like, well, it's so weird. I think it's weird too, but I'm saying they're like, we don't know why. They go after this chimp and they all get in on the brutality and the murder of that chimp to get him out of I don't remember the specifics, but it's like this happens with chimps, they'll be peaceful, and then all of a sudden every once in a while there'll be this random mob and they'll just like brutalize one of their own.
Yeah, but again, they're so different than other apes and monkeys types from the orangutan, for example. So animals, some of them thrive on the weak, and maybe it's a form of euthanasia, they thrive on the weak. Others are extremely, like elephants, are extremely altruistic and helpful to the weak. So again, what are we talking about when we say that?
One thing, getting back to the Greeks, is one thing, when we are trying to have a return to nature, notice how we immediately, and I'm doing it as much as anybody, we immediately start talking about knowledge of nature, because nature arguably can't really take care of itself anymore. Like if we just stopped all of our carbon production, climate change is still going to be going at a runaway pace. So the Greeks were able to be in harmony with nature in a way where they didn't have to think about nature. They didn't have to have correct theories about nature. They could just let nature do its thing, and that would be fine. But any possible return to nature we might have is going to be different. It's going to have to involve some kind of knowledge of nature, and that's tricky. That's really, really tricky.
Yeah, I mean, especially as long as we can't look at it in its own terms, but are constantly looking at it to try to justify how we want to treat each other.
I find that like the ancient Greeks were used that way. If people that were warlike or Nazis or whatever looked at the bellicose Greeks to sort of justify their reasoning, but you could look at ancient Greece and see all kinds of anti-war sentiment, and it's kind of like the same way people use nature, because Herodotus and Euripides had very anti-war themes going in some of their
Thucydides
literature. Yeah.
But we are back to the ideas of determinism and control that, since determinism kind of allowed also the Greeks to accept what was around them, let's call it nature for a minute. We feel that we, in modern man, tries to control and use nature or whatever they find out there that they think is non-human. And the problem with knowledge that you mentioned before has to do with the fact that we are not very good at long range, not in time and not horizontally in space, at predicting consequences, nor do we care. So with determinism, it wasn't an issue, and now it fires back on us. And we are thinking, how can we control those long term? And it gets out of hand as technology advances. We are in a very type place where our technology kind of that is very instrumental in some ways, but is bigger than us now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think this is the thing we face that the Greeks did not face, right? The Greeks could just let nature do its thing. Nature could have taken care of itself at that point. Like, I hate to say it, but like when it comes to climate change at this point, if our goal is to reduce carbon, I believe our only option is geoengineering, and I think that's unbelievably risky and will probably screw it up, but I think that's our best choice at this point. Like, just stopping carbon production is not going to accomplish what we need it to accomplish.
And this whole thing about climate change, and I am not saying this at all to be political, and anybody can prove me wrong at any time, but a while ago, I tried to read up on climate change, and I don't remember the articles I read, but I found stuff that said basically that in general, the Earth is on a downward trend toward cooling. In general, the Earth is cooling because the sun is cooling, right? So in general, over millions of years, we're getting colder and colder and colder and colder. There is a blip, teeny blip of increased heat, but in general, things are just going to get cooler, and nothing's really shifted that overall trajectory. That's my little tidbit on that. We have to work on it more. And then the other thing about that, which is also political, is, people in the meat industry is horrendous. It's cruel and evil and horrible. And I eat meat, and I can't do anything about that at this moment. But the mass production of produce to feed everybody would cause just as much carbon emission as feeding all those cows. Like growing all those crops and getting them to the people that have to get it is same intense energy usage as it's just going to be shifting it from killing cows and big meat to big corn to big carrots to big, it's, you know what I mean? You're going to end up trading one for the other, but the results are not going to be that different.
I think the idea that the Earth is cooling is a real macro thing, but the way it's heating up is more immediate to our lifetime.
Yeah,
I think that's the difference.
There's a question of scale, right? It's like, on the time scale at which the Earth is cooling is a time scale at which human beings didn't exist. And so for us, the relevant part is what's the climate during the time we have existed? In other words, what are the preconditions for our existence? Mm-hmm. Because, if we broaden the scale enough, we can go back to when there wasn't any life and say, well, that was fine. But we just go back to that. And, in an abstract sense, sure. But in a concrete sense, well, but then there's no life. And we like life. So we got to think about what are the conditions that are necessary for, survival and healthfulness.
Right. I think this gets back to the person's point who was talking about taking science on faith. Like, as much as I love Naomi Klein, her book on climate change, which was wonderful, last chapter she's talking to a complexity theorist, and I studied complexity theory. I was a mathematician before I got sick, and she says, she's talking to this complexity theorist, and she says, well, of course nobody can understand this. And my heart just sunk because, this is what you need to understand. Other than that, you're just taking it on faith. And I mean, books that talk about climate change and just take the science on faith are unbelievably gloomy and depressing. And I understand why people are turned off by them. So, I mean, this, I studied this stuff in the late 80s, and it was well known at that time. But, you needed some pretty heavy-duty math. And again, that gets back to that problem of taking science on faith. I certainly didn't take it on faith, but, I had the privilege to study that stuff. A lot of people don't, and that's not fair. And, certainly a lot of people who have the opportunity to study it don't, but, so I think that gets back to the science and as a faith issue that we talked about earlier.
Yeah. The same thing with all this anti-white sentiment. It's interesting and it's relevant, but at the same time, cultures destroying other cultures have been what humans have done since written history, right? Like, the genocidal nature of humanity has been repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated. This is just the latest, whatever happened in the last 600 years was just the latest version, the colonization of South America, the New World, Africa, Asia by Europe. That's just the latest version. You know, everybody's been doing it forever. So then how do you come to some place about it that's okay? Is that our nature? Is that human nature? I don't know. Or is there just one charismatic leader that brings one people to utterly annihilate another people?
It's an interesting question whether all people have done it in all times. I mean, are we basing
Korea
that?
never did.
Are we basing it on written history?
Well, what's
And if
Genghis
so,
Khan?
who wrote the history? It's like, how many cultures were there? And which ones are we picking as our example of what all people are like? Are we accurately describing the Ainu? Are we accurately describing, you know, it's like thousands of indigenous cultures who
God, I'm
most
with
of us
you.
don't even know the names of, let alone what their behavior was like. So
really cool
the challenge,
Polynesian cultures. They're
yeah,
really cool.
it's one of the interesting criticisms that indigenous people have of colonizer culture is that colonizers always think that all human nature is like colonizer culture. And indigenous people are like, you know, watch your generalizations. When they say, what do you mean we, white man? Part of what they're saying is, you know, who are white people to say what human nature is when the examples that we're citing are of Genghis Khan, Hitler. We pick these big dominant colonizing examples and then say, but that's what all people are like. But maybe what we're actually doing is we're picking out an aberration, because human beings haven't been here for 2,000 years or 3,000 years. We've been here for hundreds of thousands of years. And almost all of that time, 98% of that time, we have no records from.
Right.
But what we do know is, however it was that we lived was sustainable enough for human beings to survive for hundreds of thousands of years.
Mhm.
And when we look at how we're behaving now and what the arc of survival is, this clearly is not sustainable for even another 1,000 years, maybe not even another 100 years. Like, it's very clear that this is a short-term intensive culture that doesn't have its eye on how do we survive the next 300,000 years. So what that tells us is that the way that human beings used to live and relate to one another was different than the way that it is now. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here now.
I'd like to agree with that and add to it that, you know, Korea was a very sophisticated civilization. Not that, you know, that's the scale of all things, but, you know, Korea had sophisticated social interactions. They never tried to conquer anybody.
No, is that because China was too busy conquering Korea? That's my question.
I am heartened to hear that there are a couple of people in here who are very pro-Korea. Thank you for that.
Yeah. I've always wanted to learn Korean. I wanted to learn the language of a society who never tried to bully anybody. I was wondering if the language would be different.
That is, I'm from a family of, my family was Yangban. I don't know if you know what the term Yangban is. It's the scholarly aristocratic class of people. And I am from that family, that kind of a family. And when I think of my family alone, they're just generally very non-aggressive, gentle people. Just believed in working hard, studying hard, and blah blah blah. And yeah, historically speaking, not that I left Korea when I was quite young, but yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I don't recall we had to constantly defend our country, defend ourselves from the Chinese, Japanese, and all that, but we never aggressively went after another country, you know, the initiator of aggression. Yeah.
I remember growing up, there was this saying, you know, like, war is inevitable, you know, just look at history, you know. And then I looked at the Inuit, you know, they didn't even have a word for war, you know. The same
Probably
thing.
too cold up there to really fight.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm sure they're not alone either. You know, they're just. You're right. We look at that small portion of human history, written history, and conclude various things that have nothing to do with human nature. They're just large societies. You know.
It can depend on what branch of history you read as well.
Yeah.
I mean, if you read the history of philosophy, music, you know, culinary arts, I mean, the chefs always got along. The musicians managed to find common ground. Like, whenever cultures met, the chefs and, you know, the philosophers, they didn't fight. I mean, apparently in the Middle East today, Palestinian and Israeli geologists go out together. They collect their data. It's all very, fine and peaceful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Do you think that? No, I'm just kind of half jokingly saying this.
I think,
Do you
Rick,
think
are
people
you
who have tendency to eat a lot of meat, do you think they're more aggressive kind of people?
I
No.
don't think so,
No,
because
no,
my
you don't-
son was just
you don't
telling
agree
me
with
that Japan used to be meat eaters. He's at Howard University. He's a freshman. He was telling me that the Japanese were meat eaters, and then for some reason I can't remember why they outlawed meat.
Oh, is that right?
That's where the story falls apart for me. I don't know.
Well, all I know is that when I was a child, up to the age of 9 years old, I think I ate meat maybe once a year, some holiday or whatever. And I thought it was simply because there was no meat to be had. There was no meat for consumption. I lived on fish and beans, legume, and vegetables. We had chickens, but we raised the chickens basically for eggs. And it took me a long time once I came to America to like meat, but it took some time because I just was not used to eating meat growing up.
certainly there are plenty of traditional indigenous cultures that are non-belligerent that eat meat. So I don't see a direct relationship between them.
Okay, good, thank you.
I don't either. Yeah.
Wasn't Hitler a vegetarian?
Yes,
He was.
Yeah.
That's
So,
right.
I speak as a pescatarian. I don't eat meat other than seafood, but I don't think that makes me peaceful.
A lot of anthropologists claim that one of the big transitions in human history was when we went from hunter-gatherers to being agricultural. And Jared Diamond, he calls this the worst decision in all of human history. And, you can see it in the fossil record. Like after we went to farming, yes, there were fewer times of famine, but you can see like our bones got bad, our teeth got bad, a whole lot of stuff. Like, in other words, we had food, but it was way less nutritious. And also people claim that with farming and agriculture, things got very bad for women, because in a hunter-gatherer society where you had people living in closer contact, very hard to have things like rape or bullying of an individual woman. But once you had agriculture and you had one woman alone with one man, that sort of protective network that happens when you have lots of women in a community all together completely broke down. You also, when you're a hunter-gatherer and there's the threat of violence, you have the option of leaving and going to a place that's basically exactly like where you are, except, 300 miles away from the violence. Whereas if you're a farmer, you're stuck there, and people who want to, commit violence know exactly where you are, and you can't leave. So a lot of problems happened when we switched to agriculture, and maybe we want to keep this in mind if we're talking about going back to nature, because, which nature, right? Like agriculture happened, 8,000 years ago or something. So which nature do we want to go back to?
Part of what's interesting about the difference between a traditional indigenous culture and a colonizer culture is that colonizers' cultures deal in abstractions. They talk about nature in the abstract. And they do that because they aren't attached to any particular place. What defines them as a colonizer culture is that they're constantly moving on to loot and pillage new frontiers. It's like, now it's Iraq, maybe next it'll be Syria, maybe after that we're hoping it's Iran. There's this constant sense of where do we go for the oil, where do we go for the chromium, the rubber. We're constantly looking at other people's land avariciously, trying to think about how to get nutrients and profit out of it. That is a particular perspective on the world. It's a particular perspective on nature and other human beings, and it imposes a value system. If you look at a traditional indigenous culture, regardless of whether they're sedentary or migratory, the difference that they have from a colonizer culture is that they have successfully stayed in the same place, working off the resources of that land in harmony for an extensive period of time. They haven't been able to just denude the place and then run off to somewhere else and denude that. They have to actually figure out how to live in balance so that the land is able to regenerate from their presence there in order to generate the nutrients and the materials that they need in order to survive. So it's a completely different relationship to nature than to say nature is there for me to strip mine and exploit and then move on to the next frontier. You see what I mean? And part of the challenge for us is that we live in a colonizer culture. And so our natural way of interpreting nature is abstractly through like Jared Diamond with his big ideas. They're very abstract ideas. And he does pick examples from history, but he cherry picks the examples. He doesn't methodically go out and look at all of the different traditional indigenous cultures and see if they all fit his theory. He can just pick the ones that actually make his theory seem to hold together. And that's natural. That's what we do as moderns. So we come up with a big abstract idea, we then go out and cherry pick evidence to hold it together, and then we say this is the way that the world works. And usually when we're done saying this is the way that the world works, it has something to do with justifying colonizer culture and making it seem reasonable that we live this way, that we behave this way, that we're the pinnacle of objectivity in history. These are all part of a system of beliefs that we're trapped in, but that we mistake for objectivity.
When you say, Rick, when you say colonizer culture, do you just mean colonizer of the land, or do you mean colonizer of people? Because the one thing that comes up for me is the tribalism that's present, like I feel like across all ethnic groups. And I don't know, I don't have proof, but my sense is it's across all ethnic groups. This tribalism, this us versus you, is like a natural thing that happens with people.
Yeah, the word tribal, you get a very different response if you say tribal to colonizer people than you do if you say to indigenous people. Right. Indigenous people hate the way that colonizers use the word tribal. We use tribal to mean naturally people should fight with each other and somebody should dominate everybody else, and that's just the way it is. And indigenous people say, well, we managed to get along for hundreds of thousands of years without doing that until you assholes came along and started doing that to everybody. So how dare you take our word and use it to describe your behavior as though it were natural to behave that way. This is the pushback that you'll get if you say these words in a
right. So there's truth to what you're saying, and there's not truth to it, right? Like just because they say that doesn't mean anything. Words change, and the use of words change, and that's how language evolves, and that's how slang evolves, and that's something they're gonna have to come to grips with. Like the way we use tribalism now may not be the way we made up. I'm not even part of that we, but the we I inherited made up the word tribal. And the word has evolved. That's life, right? So that's why in philosophy, we always get into semantics, right? We have to establish definitions before we can have a discussion, because we have to all make sure we mean the same thing by the same word, and it's not easy.
Well, that's the challenge, you're right. But I would question whether it's evolution. This is one of the things that colonizer cultures do. Colonizer cultures conflate change and evolution and call them the same thing. So if Rome comes in and beats the crap out of Gaul, then Rome says, this is just evolution. It was meant to happen because you're inferior and I'm superior and I have to win. And so there's this way in which bullies, when they impose things upon the weak, then claim that it is the culmination of history and evolution. And maybe it's even God's will that these changes occur. So as moderns, when we talk about change, we have a very hard time not mixing it up with this notion of progress. So how we use the word tribal might not be evolution. It also might not just be a random change. It might be propaganda, that we've all been raised within a context that teaches us to see the world a certain way and to resist seeing the world any other way. And if we encounter people who see the world a different way, then we push back and say, well, you're just primitive. You just need to get with the times and understand that my advanced way of describing the world, in which I get to bully you because you're backwards, is actually more enlightened and more. And I'm not saying you're saying that. I'm saying we're all sort of caught in this larger structure of meaning.
Yeah. And it's that tribes are not fighting each other. Like as you said before, all indigenous people aren't the same. And certainly they enslaved each other, murdered each other, and got along with each other. Like there's examples of all of that. Indigenous people weren't all, can't we all just get along? Half of them or a quarter of them were deadly to non-tribe members. That's just history.
They had diversity.
Well, yeah. Actually, what you said, Rick, exactly happened with the colonialism of African nations and tribalism, which in social science, tribe just meant a smaller community than a larger community. But with the change of ideological framework, the large tribe, which is now the nation and became nationalism, is supposed to be better. It's supposed to be morally superior, just like the missionaries who brought the one God. I'm sorry to bring the word, Shreni, but the one God to the tribes were supposed to be to introduce a better God, a God that than polytheism, a God that was more abstract, that was a higher level. So that's exactly what happened. Evolution is cultural evolution is not just sometimes a change of terms, a change of ideology about the same thing.
I've got a good quote from Bernowski I'd like to share. I think you're really going to like this. So he's talking about how dominator cultures come in to peaceful cooperative cultures. They bring terror, and then something happens to the subjugated culture. I mean, in the same way that once a kid is beaten up, it seems clear that all this time cooperation has been an illusion, and the game is really about either be a bully or be bullied, and the other thing doesn't even occur to you anymore. So here's a couple of quotes. This is from Jacob Bernowski's The Ascent of Man, which I think is the greatest televisual artifact ever made. So they're talking about an Afghan game where they take the corpse of a sheep and they hit it around like a ball in polo. So they're playing polo with a corpse. So he says it expresses the monomaniac culture of conquest, the predator posing as hero because he rides the whirlwind. But the whirlwind is empty. Horse or tank, Genghis Khan or Hitler or Stalin, it can only feed on the labors of other men. The nomad in his last historic role as war maker is still an anachronism, and worse, in a world that has discovered in the last 12,000 years that civilization is made by settled people. Of course, it is tempting to close one's eyes to history and instead to speculate about the roots of war in some possible animal instinct, as if, like the tiger, we still had to kill to live, or like the robin redbreast, to defend a nesting territory. But war, organized war, is not a human instinct. It is a highly planned and cooperative form of theft. And that form of theft began 10,000 years ago when the harvesters of wheat accumulated a surplus and the nomads rose out of the desert to rob them of what they themselves could not provide. I think that's great. That's so great. He's such a great writer.
What's his name again?
Jacob Bernowski.
You can put it in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah. But words do evolve. Like when I hang out with my teenage sons, there's a bunch of words they use in different contexts. And I'm already like, I'm that old now that you have a whole set of slang that I don't recognize. And it happens every 5 or 6 years. It comes out of a certain community and then it filters to the mainstream. Like there is an evolution of language that is inevitable when different people use words that originated for one purpose and have changed.
I agree with you that words change. What I'm questioning is, should we call that change evolution? And part of the reason is that our notions of evolution, especially when we use it colloquially, have less to do with biological evolution, which was a very specific thing, and more to do with the 19th century concept of the Great March of Progress. Right, that was the great distortion that the European discoverers of evolution imposed upon it, that we spent 100 years trying to get out from under, is the idea that evolution has a purpose, and the purpose is to lead to white, straight European men to dominate everybody else because they're all primitive versions of white, straight European men. That was the 19th century position, right? Is that the March of Progress goes from, slime and fishes and leads up to Darwin because he's a white guy and so therefore should rule the world. And almost immediately, people began imposing this notion of the Great March of Progress upon everything and all changes. So if King Leopold II of Belgium was slaughtering people in the Congo to get rich, he would say, oh, this isn't just a change. I'm not doing something bad. This is evolution, right? All change naturally, leads to what God meant or what nature meant. And by that, I mean me getting rich and being in charge of everything. So when we look at language,
he might have believed what he said, right? He wasn't selling a crock of shit. He could have been, but he might have deeply believed that insane.
Oh yeah, propagandists mostly believe what they say. I mean, this is the issue, right? That when we say Homo faber, man as a maker, as a description of our species, Kenneth Smith's core argument is we tend to get confused by that and think that we're talking about tools and buildings.
Right.
But the thing that we manufacture more than anything is worldviews and
Right.
language and perspectives. And so we can believe them, but they can still be propaganda at the same time that we're pushing them and trying to get more people to believe them.
Well, here's one example. In the French Revolution, the hierarchy that was being murdered by the people, I think it was the prince or the king, when he was put on the guillotine, and while he was in jail, he was like, I don't understand this. I am meant to lead. I am meant to be the king. God has ordained this. Whether you believe in God or not, he believed that he had a right to that life. And up until the point he was murdered, his head was chopped off. He felt like there was a great misjustice, that he deserved his position. He inherited it from his family. Nothing could change his worldview.
That's
It
right.
was his worldview.
That's right. That's why he had to die. His worldview was, you should all be miserable so I can feel great. God chose me. God loves me.
The people who murdered him had to die, and then the people who murdered him had to die, and the people
Pinnacle of the world. I mean,
They all had to die.
that's the problem we get into, is if we put too much investment into people's intentions, and then we lose track of what's real, because people lose track of what's real. There's an interesting thing here. Consider the definition of the virtue of honesty. Is someone being honest if they tell you what they actually truly believe in their heart?
Well, people with Asperger's tell you what they believe, and they're very unpopular.
Yeah, but that qualifies as honesty? See, how do we define being honest? So we define it in terms of intent. So if somebody believes a pack of lies, but they believe it completely, and they pass on that pack of lies to you, and what you believed before happened to be true, but now you're persuaded to believe a lie, we call that honesty. Because after all, he didn't mean to mislead you away from the truth, right? His intentions were noble and pure, so therefore he should be called virtuous, even though what he just did is decrease the amount of truth in the world.
Yeah, this is the be true to yourself movement that's very popular right now.
Right.
It's like you have an interior, whatever it is, random diseased self produced by the ghetto, and you have to be true to that, You have to be authentic to you have to be true to your authentic core.
Right.
Be true to express your core, man.
Right. Whereas I like the more Delphi approach, right? I want to question ourselves. I want to start from the assumption we don't really know who we are. We don't know what's the nature of the sacred, or what's the nature of nature itself, or human nature. That we got to be on a journey of discovery, and to do that, I got to be skeptical about the definitions I use for words and about the worldview that I bring to bear on things. I need to question that, because if I don't question that, then I'm just going to be trapped in my own ego all the time.
That's right. The last thing you want to rely on is the patient self-report. If you really want to do medicine well, you don't let like my dad thought it was the fact that the couch was too soft. And he had a tumor at the base of his spine. He's like, my back's hurting these days because I'm leaning the wrong way to use my laptop. You never ask the patient what's going on.
Right. That's the other thing is that I forgot. Shit.
It'll come back to you.
Okay, to go back to words and how words change, language change all the time, but it doesn't mean evolution in terms of progress. It hit on me, coming from another country, how racism tried to change itself, to improve itself, by changing the word we are naming people of color. So it was colored people, it was Negro, and then it was Black American, African American, now it's Black. And I think Black Americans themselves kind of laugh at that, because racism persists under different guises. And they laugh at it and they call each other the word that doesn't mean any condescending. Hey, my nigger. They are not.
They use it with an R at the end. They use it with an A at the end. You got to say it with the A, not the R.
Okay. So, thank you. What I mean is that the word itself is what is in the mind of a person. And therefore, a lot of evolution is just a change of ownership.
Right. A lot of what we call evolution is a change of ownership. Yeah.
Yeah.
A really chilling example of that, like when the Berlin Wall fell down and East European countries were no longer under Soviet control, and they had access to Western media, you would hear a lot of people just going on these anti-Semitic rants, and this would be broadcast on Western television. And what was kind of, well, okay, if that wasn't chilling enough, what was even more chilling is you could then, over the course of the next few weeks, see these people learn that the way that they were talking wasn't working on Western media. And they weren't going to get the aid money they needed, and they weren't going to get the visas that they needed and all this. And you could see them change to saying, well, in our country, we need to deal with non-indigenous elements or people who were not part of this country for centuries or something. You would see them coming up with slimy code words, but you just know that they meant Jew. Very, very disturbing, and it happened in a matter of weeks. You could literally watch them learning how to be anti-Semitic without offending people, and you could watch them do it from one day to the next. They got better at it.
That's the danger with political correctness. That's why most of us who don't want to be the language police, can't stand all that. Like, I don't want people to call me racial slurs, but by the same time, the political correctness has stifled things, and then people have to just kind of, they figure out how to navigate through and still be shitty people because you didn't do anything about their hearts. You just gave them another law and a confinement of their feelings, and that's not going to get you anywhere. It might, but it's not that useful.
So the challenge I find when evaluating words and trying to see whether a change is a legitimate development that improves the language, or allows people to express, ideas, or whether it's propaganda, because a tremendous amount of propaganda is generated at all times, is to look at the balance of power. You got to ask, you got to follow the money. You got to say cui bono. You got to say, is there a bullied relationship here? And if so, which one is the bully and which one is the victim? And then you have to deliberately, in order to correct for propaganda, you have to deliberately push your thumb on the scales to push it back to balance. Because if you just let the scales balance however they balance on their own, you're going to be letting propaganda win, because the people who generate propaganda have enormous amounts of money to use to distort the world. So you have to put your thumb back on the other side of the scales to say, but what would this actually be? So, for example, in the contest about the word tribal, the tug of war between what colonizers want to define tribal as and what indigenous tribal people want to define it as, I'm inclined to let the indigenous people define it, because they're the ones who were living in tribal societies that survived for a long period of time relatively harmoniously. I mean, when we arrived on this continent, they had not wiped themselves out 10,000 years before. It wasn't a great desolation the way that we're making things in a hurry. So in order to correct for the power that we bring to bear to rewrite history, to make ourselves seem to be the heroes, coming and bringing advanced ideas, and those poor noble savages, they just needed to learn how to read and go to church like we do. I'm inclined to say I'm not going to treat it as just a disagreement between two equals. I'm going to be inclined to say I'm going to give I'm going to assume that the indigenous people are the ones who really ought to be in a better position to define this term, because it's about themselves.
But they have to recognize it first. When I was in West Africa doing research some years ago, we spoke with school kids, and we wanted, just general demographic. We asked what tribe they are. It was French Africa, so quelle tribe. And they did not, and they refused to understand the word tribe. I'm sure they understood, but what they understood, it's not cool. It's not allowed to even recognize the word.
Right.
Which meant, progress, and all the missionaries and the colonialists were so happy at the cultural change that they have seen. Just went down. Yeah, or went to the basement, underground.
One thing I find really perhaps we should be focusing on when we look at Native Canadian First Nation experience here is when when people first came to this continent, let's say 10,000 years ago, they weren't very nice. Like, they wiped out huge numbers of big predators. You know, the fossil record shows this. There's plenty of evolutionary evidence that when, 10,000 years ago, when people first came here, they did a whole lot of terrible things to the environment. But what's exciting is that they learned, right? And by the time European colonizers got here, they actually were living a pretty harmonious life. Like, if we just sort of pretend that First Nations people are sort of inherently better at living with nature, well, that's kind of hopeless, right? Because then, well, okay, so maybe they're inherently better, but how does that help the rest of us? But if we see that they weren't all that good when they got here, right? They wiped out all the big predators. They completely disrupted the ecosystem by wiping out big predators, and then they learned, and they got good at it. And that's what can be really exciting.
That's an exciting story. The problem is you're about 10 years out of date in your research about the peopling of the Americas. In the last 10 years, there have been a series of breakthroughs. The Clovis first theory that people came over Beringia about 10,500 years ago has now been decisively disproven, and no serious archaeologists believe it anymore. It's what we were all taught in school, and we now know it's false. And the reason we know it's false is that we have found archaeological sites that date back to 14,000 years ago in Chile, 17,000 years ago elsewhere. The latest one is 26,000 years ago. We found a site. So what we know now is that the Beringia theory was an artificial theory made up by white people in an attempt to link the arrival of indigenous peoples in the Americas with the extinction. And what we know now is that indigenous people were in the Americas for tens of thousands of years before the extinctions happened. And that what it probably means is that the Americas were peopled by multiple complex waves over time of different groups of people with different value systems.
Okay, here's a fact which is compatible with everything you just said. Obviously, this happened a long time ago. Obviously, there's a lot of disputed knowledge claims here, and this might touch on our issue about taking science as a matter of faith. But here's some evidence that is neutral with regards to whatever all the stuff that you said. There's a species of deer-like creature. They're called a pronghorn. And the thing about a pronghorn is it runs absurdly fast. It runs so much faster than any predator it could possibly have. I mean, it's like if you had a gazelle and its fastest predator was something like a tortoise. It's ridiculous how quickly the pronghorn runs. The only possible evolutionary explanation for this is that at one point it had much, much faster predators. Those predators no longer exist. Presumably somebody wiped them out, maybe 26,000 years ago, maybe 8,000 years ago. The pronghorn evidence is neutral with regards to when people came. All I'm saying is that people came, they damaged the environment, and then they learned how to stop damaging the environment, and that's what's exciting.
Well, you're right about.
I can add one thing, and is that when humans entered Australia around 50,000 years ago, all the large animals disappeared. When humans entered New Zealand, I think around 1,000 years ago, or around between 1,000 or 800 years ago, again, all the large animals there disappeared. Apparently, wherever humans go, all the large animals disappear.
Right. So there are a couple of issues here, and one of them is that all the large mammals, an enormous percentage of the large mammals, died out at the end of the Ice Age, and they died out at the end of the Ice Age all over the world at the same time. Anywhere it was in a northern clime where there were tundra conditions. They died out in Europe, they died out in Asia, they died out in the Americas. It's true that, as far as we can tell, the Clovis culture arose around that same time in the Americas. But that would, even if we accept the hypothesis that that was the cause and not the end of the Ice Age, we then have to explain why all the megafauna died out simultaneously in Siberia and in Europe as well. So the thing is, you're right about the dates of the die-offs of the megafauna. It was around the end of the Ice Age. It's just that people had already been here for a long time before that. So what's possible to try to salvage what you're saying and make the theory work is it's possible that the new Clovis culture arose at that time and that it was the one that did the extinctions. We don't really know.
I think the end of Ice Age was around 10,000 years ago, but in Australia, the big animals disappeared 50,000 years ago.
Exactly.
And also in New Zealand, they disappeared exactly when humans entered the island around 1,000 or 800 years ago, which was years after the end of Ice Age. When, as far as I see, wherever humans have gone, the large animals completely disappear.
Like Africa,
Exactly.
right? That's why there's no elephants.
Well,
Africa is an anomaly, and I really don't know why.
Well, because people had evolved there and had plenty of time to learn how to not mess up the environment. Like I think there's a danger when I grew up in the reasonably far north. Lots of native people around. They're just people, some are good, some are bad. There's a tendency when somebody is oppressed or, unfairly dumped on by society to pretend that they're nicer than everybody else. Like I happen to be disabled. There's plenty of people who want to pretend that disabled people are all nice and innocent and sweet. Well, no, we're not. We're just like everybody else, Sometimes I'm nice, sometimes I'm not. Like I think when, looking at First Nations people, we have to, we can't just pretend that they're innocent nature children. They did some good stuff, they did some bad stuff, just like everybody else. Now, there's plenty we can learn from them, because at some point they figured out how to actually do what we need to do. Like, we can definitely learn from them, because they actually figured out how to not mess up their environment, and we need to learn that.
Yeah, surely it's possible.
You're right
Go ahead, Ayala.
You're right that we tend to romanticize the what we used to call primitive, and now it's not even cool to call it primitive. We call it simple societies. But what is important here is not to feel superiority, because we are doing the same thing in different ways. In the last 50 years, we had 2/3 of the wildlife extinct.
Yes.
Not necessarily big animals. So what is the difference? What size? Maybe.
Right. I mean, it should be possible to talk about what makes indigenous cultures different without pretending that we're saying that they are the home of all virtue.
Right.
Right. It should be possible to point out that indigenous cultures that have been in place for thousands of years have somehow managed to come up with a culture that allows them to be in place for thousands of years,
Right.
without implying that therefore they're all angels and they're all perfect and they have no flaws. And
Who was it? The Aztecs or the other ones that were cannibals that sacrificed people and ate their hearts? I mean, that's not, in my opinion, that's not really the way we should be going.
Yeah, exactly. With regards to what Ayala said, I was reading long time ago the memoirs of one of these French Jesuits and missionaries that had come to Canada around 400 years ago. I mean, he had come with the first wave. And so he had met the indigenous people in what they really, it was their real life. He had met them, he had went, and he had written this memoir he had with them, he was living with them. And one of the parts was really shocking for me, that he said that he was traveling with a few of the indigenous people from one tribe, and they were the guides. And then they reached the camp of another indigenous people, which was a tribe from an opposing, opposing tribe. And those guides saw that there were no men in that camp at that time, because men had gone hunting, only women and children. So they told their French, the people who were coming, the French people, wait here. They took their knives, they went into the camp, they killed all the women and the children right there in front of the French, and they came back, and they were not at all worried that they were doing something strange or cruel, because these were not people. They were from another tribe. People who belong to another tribe, they are not humans. So we human beings have always been like this.
Mm-hmm.
So this is our
One thing
challenge,
we
right?
should be. One thing we should be.
Go ahead.
Okay. One thing we should be careful about is there was an enormous amount of incentive for conquerors to have people declared cannibals, because the religious authorities in Europe so basically the kings and the Pope and the religious authorities had said, if a tribe is not cannibalistic, you have to treat them with sort of Christian blah, blah, blah. You have to be kind to them. You can't enslave them, all this stuff. But if they're cannibals, then they put themselves out of the realm of Christian protection, and you can enslave them, you can take their stuff, whatever you want. So there was a huge incentive for conquistadors to describe the peoples that they encountered as cannibals. I'm not saying that they weren't. I'm just saying we got to read these firsthand accounts with a bit of a grain of salt.
Yeah, because there's enormous perverse incentives. And the thing, you don't have to want to romanticize indigenous peoples to understand that there is an enormous problem that we face as moderns. The problem we face as moderns is that part of the core of modernism is the pretense that we're normal, right? We want to, white people always want to pretend that American white culture is normal culture, and that people who come here from other countries need to become normal. They need to act like we do. Otherwise, they're still acting like immigrants and they're not blending in and they're not melting properly. There is this assertion of normalcy, universality that modernism does in order to claim that there are no choices but modernism. You're either like us or you go extinct. That's like built into us. That's why the Great March of Progress. That's why countless things. And so what it means is when we're looking at other cultures, we're inclined to do one of two things with them, right? We polarize. So either we say we're people, they're people, therefore we're the same, right? Or we say, we're civilized, but they're savages, so they have to change. We like polarize between these two positions as the only legitimate positions that we're allowed to take on another culture. And the reason that we do this is to frame in the allowed range of debate and discussion to exclude the thing that we don't want to talk about. The thing that we don't want to talk about is, what if we are not universal? What if we are not the pinnacle of evolution or creation? What if we are a specific culture, a specific kind of culture in history that has its own weird peculiarities that are just as questionable as anybody else's peculiarities? And maybe we should start asking questions about whether we should be doing things this way. What a culture does to try to protect itself is to create an envelope that makes it impossible to perceive itself accurately, to make it seem like as long as you're in this culture, you're seeing the world correctly. And as part of doing that, part of what we do is we either erase the distinctions between other cultures and say, so what if we rape and pillage and have slavery and genocide? Everybody always did that. It's fine, right? That's one modernist position to take. The other modernist position to take is, we would never do things like that. That's uncivilized. Only bad people do that, and they should be exterminated. Like those Indians over there, let's exterminate them because they do those things.
But
these are like we shift, right? We shift between these positions.
Cultures have to maintain their identity. Like, to go back to that, if you go to Egypt, you will never become, none of us will ever become Egyptian citizens. We will never legally work in Egypt because you can only be an Egyptian if you were born in Egypt. They don't offer anybody that, and they never will, and they have no intention to. And that's okay. That's what they've chosen to do. It's okay. Sure. If you move to Japan or you move to India, if you don't learn how to get with the food or the language, how are you going to survive? Should everyone learn English? Or should you go to their country and learn their language if you move there? Should you go there and say, hey guys, I think you guys should also learn English because I moved here and I speak English, right? It seems weird, but when you flip it, and I'm a hyphenated American, I'm only 2 generations in. When you flip it, it's all of a sudden, there's something going on in America. We have a major identity crisis. Maybe this country always did have an identity crisis, but nobody knows what's going on. I'm a hyphenate. I'm Indian, Puerto Rican. My husband's African American or Black. I don't know what our kids are going to turn out to be because now we're watered down.
Probably humans.
And there's something that's getting lost there. There's a sadness. I have a sadness about that because all the rich culture of my ancestors is going to go away. It's inevitable, and it's sad and tragic. But at the same time, what do I want them to do? Pretend they're Indian? They're not. Do I want them to learn Hindi? I don't know. Should they learn Spanish? Should they learn how to cook Puerto Rican food? I don't know. I don't have the answer. But we have a major identity crisis, and we are nobilizing the oppressed. And there's still, you're not anymore, but it sounded like we were. And it's like they're not genetically superior and they're not genetically inferior. And they murdered and raped and pillaged, and they also lived well together. Like there's nothing, that's just how I feel sad that might be human nature. And then honesty.
Shrani, how do you say your name, please?
You said it perfectly.
Okay, Shrani. Yeah, it's interesting.
have a
that
natural
you,
ability to
you,
pronounce my
it's interesting that you said that it's sad to see that your family is, it's like basically like conglomeration of like major mutt.
the new
And
mud.
that you feel sad about that that your family members have lost certain culture, like whether it's Indian, Puerto Rican, whatever. And I have felt that about what's happening to Korea. Korea, for example, is not the Korea I knew as a child. Korea has become, one of the examples is that apparently there's more plastic surgery going on in Korea than any other country in the world. I find it to be very sad. But maybe I am the one who should reconsider how I think. Maybe it's not so sad. Maybe we are coming up with a new cultural identity, not the classical cultural identity of Korea that I knew. So it's interesting that you know how you feel about cultural loss of
I have a
cultural
sense of
identity.
loss about it, but it's okay.
I think that
You know,
that's appropriate.
identity is a two-sided sword, and that's another topic altogether. I feel that the attachment to identity can be very destructive, but it also very
Sorry,
important.
sorry, I went off on tangent there.
No, it's okay. You didn't start it. It just went that way. But to go back to Rick, Rick, what did you say at the end? You know, I kind of lost my train of thought, and I thought.
I was talking about the way that modernism and the United States is a sort of nearly purified form of modernism compared to other cultures because we so eradicated the cultures that were here.
Oh yeah.
Like if you compare India, for example, it's not that India isn't a modern culture, it's that India retains more of the culture it had before modernism. So there's more of that human need to fill in the blanks is being satisfied in India than it is in the United States. Because in the United States, we talk about the melting pot as a metaphor for sort of how we are all going to come together and make something new. Kenneth Smith talks about this a lot. And part of what he talks about is the way that what modernism does is it preys upon the human need for culture. It says it recognizes that we have a desperate driving need to be somebody and to belong and for our lives to make sense. But instead of fulfilling that the way a traditional indigenous culture would do, for better or for worse, what it does is it evacuates us of those things. It erases as much of traditional culture as it can, and then says, if you don't want to feel that aching drive, give us some money, and for 2 hours you can watch a movie. And then at the end of the movie, you'll feel good for a day or two, and then afterwards the ache's going to come back because it didn't actually fill anything. It didn't actually complete you. It just sort of kind of carried you along a little bit. Or you can watch this TV show, or you can vote for this candidate, or you can root for this team. But they're all little consumer-oriented. It's like the difference between a cure and a treatment, right? What an indigenous culture has is a cure. It will actually make you belong, make you feel like you're part of something or somebody. But what the United States has and what modernism has is a treatment that you have to keep paying for forever to kind of momentarily push off that aching sense of void. So the problem is, we talk about when we come here, maybe we'll make something new, but the only way we'll make something new is if we stop it from doing what it wants to do to us. Because what it wants to do to us is prevent us from making something new, so that we will always be hungry and be great consumers.
Okay, the problem is that we are not too good. We humans are not too good at being in two places at one time. And when we are consumed, we have just that much psyche energy for one culture, and then we would like, and we are very binary too. We enjoy something, we tend to forget what was before, and we need to sort it out. A lot of the traditions that we are used to and we love have a lot of negative elements to them. They are not necessarily good, but we kind of normalized them and got to love them because it reminds us of our childhood and the gifts that we got. So again, we don't want to romanticize tradition. We don't want to throw stones at the new. The problem that you spoke before about colonialism and the superiority of Western culture, or the sense of superiority, a lot of it was reinforced by historians. Historians dictate to a culture what the embedded values are. It also reflects a certain culture, but it replicated the same meme that the old were savage, the tribes were savage, and we are more sophisticated people. So, it's very, very hard to start thinking new and yet accepting some of the tradition, not to buy the whole box. It's almost impossible because we have a paradigm in our mind of like a box through which we think, from which the thoughts kind of proceed. And it's very hard to see from another box. This is our subjectivity or our collective subjectivity. Sociologists seem to understand it. And when they talk about culture, they talk about relativism. Okay. And I understand Shreni's being kind of struggling, at least, with different traditions and identities. And I wish we could live as a society in pluralism, which means diversity, and you can, but humanity failed at that. It always goes to the vertical axis, to who is better than who.
I wanted to object to something Rick said, and I suppose it's important to know that I'm Canadian, not American, in the nature of this objection. So, Rick, I believe your name's Rick, was claiming that America was sort of an epitome of European modernism. That seems exactly wrong. I mean, Europe had some very extreme philosophical ideas after the Renaissance. You know, the empiricists, the rationalists, people like Descartes, Hume, Locke. This volatile, very extreme, somewhat easy to caricature ideas, and then along came Immanuel Kant and synthesized it all, and things started to get sensible. And I feel like America basically left the European intellectual tradition right before Kant. So America's kind of stuck with these extreme, wild ideas and never got them synthesized into Kant. And I would say that Kant is where European modernism kind of starts, and it's where you have the start of an idea of an actual balance between the individual and society. I mean, Kant, Hegel, Marx, these kind of philosophers started talking about how to have a harmony between the individual and society, and America just left the European intellectual tradition before all of that started. And this may also shape our discussion about First Nations people, because in Canada it's very different. I'm not saying we're doing things right. In fact, I think we're doing a lot of things wrong, but it's very different in Canada for First Nations people than it is in the U.S.
Yeah, I follow First Nations relations in Canada quite closely, partially because of the contrast. I don't think you and I disagree the way that you think we do, because we're using the word modernism to mean two different things. So what you mean by modernism, I agree with you. And if you knew what I meant by modernism, you might agree with me, because I'm not talking about that, what you're talking about.
And we really think Canadians were good to Indigenous people, because all the Canadians I meet, it seems like since they didn't have African slaves, they treated Indigenous people really shitty.
Yeah.
Actually, we did have some slavery. That's come out in the last 10 years, that we had local pockets of slavery. And I'm certainly not claiming that we treated First Nations people well in the past. And I'm not claiming we treat people well now either. But things are different. I mean, we've got a humongous nation called Nunavut, which is bigger than Texas. and it's entirely governed by First Nations people.
Right.
Like, you guys don't have that.
Right.
I'm
You
not,
didn't-
yeah.
Right.
Ottawa man, what's your name?
That's Philip.
Philip Highland.
Philip. Okay.
Yeah. There's a
Hi guys. I have to say goodbye, but it was very good discussion. Thank you very much. Bye.
pleasure talking to you,
Bye,
Rama.
Rama.
Yeah, goodbye.
Yeah, a report came out, I think about 5 years ago, on which countries in the world have the worst track record in the treatment of indigenous peoples. And
which
it's the
country gets it? Who gets it?
United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And
We get the worst.
We're not talking about.
How does Denmark fit? I hear a lot about Denmark.
so what's interesting about Europe, have you guys followed in the last 5 years, there's been a lot of research using genomics to study the emergence of light-colored skin and the spread, where it began. And it's fascinating stuff because only 8,000 years ago, Europe was dark-skinned. You know, there's Cheddar Man in Cheddar, England. They reconstructed his genome, and he had blue eyes and dark skin.
I've heard it could be as recent as 5,000 years ago. That whiteness might have just appeared as recent as 5,000 years ago.
Yeah, the current evidence suggests that it arose in the Caucasus or somewhere in that vicinity, and that it probably arose as a mutation during the Ice Age, that a population got cut off, surrounded by ice, and so they didn't interact with the people around them. And that was where light skin arose, and it stayed in that region, moved a little bit north, and stayed for a very long time. When it did come into Europe, it only came in a little bit at a time, and so, like you're right, very late into history, Europeans were still dark skinned. You could start to see light skinned people show up in the Baltics. For example, it's one of the earlier places that they came in. But what it means is that if we're talking, you know, like the most recent study in Native America puts the earliest emergence so far that we've seen of indigenous peoples in the Americas back to 26,000 years ago. If you look at Europe 26,000 years ago, there weren't any white people there.
Well, can you
You
just
know, the
clarify-
Baltics
can you
dark
just clarify?
skin.
Because indigenous people are really light skinned. Like, people have this impression of Indians as Native Americans as dark. There's a ton of Native Americans that they look Asian and they look white. Their skin is white. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So I
different,
don't-
right?
Not
There's
here
different
in
waves of
Mexico.
immigration.
Clarify what light skinned and dark skinned is. How much melanin you're talking about? We say Europe was dark skinned. Like, they weren't African looking. They were tan. What were they?
They mean they did not have the gene that all white people have.
Okay, I don't believe there's a gene. I got to read that paper. I don't think there's a white gene, because I know melanin is you know, it's produced on a spectrum. Everybody's got cells called
Yes, we do.
I don't think there's a gene either. I think it's a cluster of various genetic factors.
It's complicated, just like eye color. Eye color is very complicated.
Do the
There's
reading.
many
You'll find it very interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if you have a reference, but I definitely am dying to look into this. This sounds
Yeah,
really-
it's one of the things I've been following. Yeah, because
Rick,
I was very surprised by how late the people with the light skin gene came into Europe. Like as recently as 5,000 years ago, an enormous number of people in Europe still had darker skin.
yeah, and it's not specifically a light skin gene. Like Japanese people often have very, very light skin.
Yeah.
It's specifically what we call Caucasian.
Caucasian skin,
But
specifically.
Yeah.
That's weird, because that's like the
Yeah,
Caucasus Mountains are in Persia, and you're saying that because Caucasian came from the Caucasus Mountains in Persia, and somehow like one random recessive white person managed to spread a gene. It's a very I got to check that out. 'Cause
Yeah, it's great stuff. It's great
I
reading.
don't think it's going to pan out scientifically.
Well, the reason that it pans out scientifically is that there's more than one way to get light colored skin. So we're not talking about all the different ways to get light colored skin. We're talking about the specific gene that all Caucasian people have.
Yeah, I don't
That,
think
that, that
it's
leads
Yeah,
us
but
to skin, our light
Everybody can have a gene, and that doesn't follow. The conclusion doesn't follow from that. I think it's a cluster of genes or a cluster of genetic factors.
The
And then
point of
the-
this isn't to say what counts as white skin. The point of this is to say Europe didn't used to look the way that it looks now. We think of Europe as where white people came from. But based on this, that's not where white people came from. They came from the boundary between Asia and Europe. And they spread and colonized Europe.
Well, you send me the article. I'll read it. Rick, you had said I might agree with you if I knew your definition of modernism. Well, let's find out.
Okay.
And before, I just want to say one thing about the Caucasus Mountains. I know there are people who are may or may not follow the Bible, but there is the whole thing about Genesis, and there's a chapter on the fallen angels or the demons or the fallen angels came down and they found man fair. They found man fair, and they wanted to, you know, mate with man. Where they came down is this mountain in the Caucasus Mountains. I forget the name of the mountain. And they came there, and that's where they came down and found man to be, or woman to be fair and like mated.
Yeah, there's all kinds of interesting stuff in the Bible.
Funny thing, it's the same mountains.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
I looked it up right now in Google, and the amount and kind of pigment in the skin is controlled by genes. So
Yeah.
But that's not enough for us scientists here. You can't just say genes. That doesn't mean anything really.
Yeah.
Yes, I posted about it on Facebook yesterday, but I don't have it in front of me right now, so I can't give you the gene designation that they're tracking. The point is, they're not trying to explain where all light skin comes from. They're just trying to track where did the people that we call Europeans come from. And they came from admixtures from multiple places. But for example, Cheddar Man had darker skin but blue eyes. So blue eyes came into Europe separately from the lighter skin. They were unrelated originally. Which in the modern sense, we always think blonde hair, light skin, blue eyes go together, right? That's what it means to be, you know, whiter than white, you know, the way the Nazis liked it. But it turns out, you know, Cheddar Man had pretty dark skin, darker than anybody I'm seeing on this video, but he had bright blue eyes. So
I think we're getting in the area where, you know, facts matter and we can't just summon up these facts automatically. So please send the articles around and
yeah.
If you can,
yeah.
that would be
in order to share that, we'll have to, you know, have some way of contact after this call.
put our email in here. You could just maybe email it.
Yeah, and
the Smithsonian Mag link, Rick.
Oh, you found the link.
Ooh, yes.
There you go. That'll give some people something to read. That's one of a lot of them. There's just a huge area of research right now. So at any rate,
thing is that cross-culturally there is a propensity to think lighter is prettier, like Asian culture, Indian culture. I don't know about African culture, but like, you know, it's weirdly cross-culturally this thing about, even pre-colonially, I think there's a thing about lighter skin happening in different cultures.
well, not just prettier, but it used to be that dark was a symbol of negativity, of something bad, and light is wisdom, and right, and the good.
Well, this
Well,
is like
it was
project,
associated
right?
with if you didn't have to labor in the fields, right? I mean, if you were able to stay, if you didn't have to work in the sun, your skin would tend to be lighter, regardless of what culture and part of the world you grew up in. And it got to be associated with aristocracy, having money, having prestige, that sort of thing. So.
That's right.
Amazing.
So you asked, Philip, you asked about the use of modernism. I'm using the term the way that the philosopher Kenneth Smith that we're talking about today uses the term. He uses the term not in the strict philosophical sense, not in the art movement sense, not in the music sense, not in any of these senses. He uses it in the sense of there having been in European history at least 3 big epochs that conceived of humanity, the divine, and the natural world in coherent but different ways. And he draws this out of the Greeks. He draws it out of Hegel, Nietzsche, Kierkegaard. He draws it out of Hannah Arendt and others as well. And basically, it has to do with the idea that in the ancient world, nature was seen as preeminent, the source of all meaning, the source of everything. The gods were seen as subservient to nature. So, you know, Zeus was an aspect of nature. He was not a ruler over nature. Nature existed before Zeus, and the Greeks believed that nature would continue to exist after Zeus. And so that's a very different relationship between the natural and the divine than you see in the medieval era. In the medieval era, nature was overthrown, and God was seen as the source of all meaning and all miracles and magic. It was considered a heresy to claim that there were any other sources of meaning or miracles. Only God, and God only. And so nature stopped being a source of meaning and power and became this worthless, empty shell that was a mere creation of God, and really is just a testing ground for whether you deserve to get into heaven. And so meaning was all concentrated into the divine, and nature was was evacuated of all meaning. And then the modernist revolution was overthrowing God and saying man is the source of everything. What we decide to do with our will and our intellect and our negotiations is the source of all meaning. And nature has no meaning. We can exploit the crap out of it. And gods have no meaning. They're just, have whatever religion you want. We don't care because that doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is who has the power. And so modernism, became man above nature, above God. Whereas the medieval world was God above man, who was the custodian over nature, which had been evacuated of meaning. But in the ancient world, nature was the source of all meaning, and the gods were embodiments of different aspects of that meaning, of the things that have authority over man, and man was at the bottom. And so these are cosmologies, and they're defined so crisply that it's not easy to confuse them with each other. This isn't a big tangle of complicated things. These are really core concepts in our understanding of where humanity fits into the world, and how do we decide what we ought to be doing. So modernism is the epoch in which both nature and divinity are seen as subservient to man's rational will, enlightened self-interest, democracy, capitalism, science. All of these things are quintessentially modernist.
Okay, I don't have a problem with what you said so far. I have a problem with the idea that America is sort of the epitome of this. Like, I would say that the United States has a certain very skewed sense of the idea of man over nature, or people over nature. And that is that it's individual people who who are sort of the center of that investigation, right? I mean, you can see this in our response to COVID-19. Like, people I know here who are Americans, they're surprised that we follow our government and are actually, taking the steps needed to not spread the virus. And we're doing quite well at not spreading the virus. And because they see, they see things in terms of individual freedom. And I keep saying, yeah, but part of freedom is having the freedom to choose a government. Like, this is Kant's definition of freedom, right? Freedom is the ability to choose rules that you yourself will then obey, right? And in the U.S., arguably, people don't really feel that way, right? They feel like everybody. I mean, one thing I find weird is, I ask Americans love democracy. I say, okay, but the only democracy you have is your government, and you hate your government. And they say, yep. I very rarely meet an American that likes their own government. And then I say, okay, but the only government you have, the only democracy you have is your government. So in what sense do you love democracy if you hate the one and only manifestation of democracy you have? Like, you don't vote for who runs Google or IBM or General Motors or any of these, right?
That's right.
So it just seems like the U.S., yes, there's a strain of modernism there, but when you get to Kant, it's like the U.S. left the European philosophical tradition before Kant, before there was this synthesis of the idea of individual freedom and the freedom to choose your own society. Like, I don't see the freedom to make individual choices as being a very relevant freedom. I see the freedom as being able to shape my government and shape my society. That's where the real freedom is. And I think that's the aspect of freedom that doesn't really have a role in the U.S. anymore. It's all about this sort of libertarian idea of individual people doing whatever the hell they want, and that counts as freedom. To me, that's the freedom of a 14-year-old who's going to rebel against the authority. But then you say, well, wait a minute, one day you're going to grow up to be the authority. And that's where, I think there was a big break with modernism writ large on the world stage. I don't think the U.S. is the epitome of modernism. I think it went off on its own very strange tangent.
Are you under the impression that when I say the U.S. is the epitome of modernism, that I'm praising the U.S.?
No. I have the idea that there's something about European modernism that you dislike, and there's plenty to dislike. I'm not claiming otherwise.
No,
okay.
That's absolutely not right.
Well, let me just finish what I think my impression is, and then you can correct me, okay?
Okay.
So I think what you're saying is that European modernism has a lot of problems, and that those problems funneled into the U.S. and reached their true epitome.
No.
Okay.
No, no.
Let me also interject here the way I read Rick's interpretation of Smith. And that is, we have, Americans have a problem with an understanding of the principle of freedom, not just in terms of, yes, they should understand that responsibility is not, and freedom are not exclusive. In fact, they go together, as far as choosing a government, for example, Philip. But the principle that freedom or any other, that we don't act in a vacuum, that the world is we are constrained within certain, and that goes with what Rick said, the full sense of control that men have in modernity, putting themselves above nature, above God, and that's above reality, as if they can, if their will dictate reality.
Right.
It's hallucinatory.
Yeah. See, Philip, the thing is I don't like modernism. Yes. So when I accuse the Europeans of not being as modern as the United States, I'm praising them. And the thing that I mean by modern is what I have learned from Hannah Arendt and Kierkegaard and Kenneth Smith and these others. It's not at all about the European modern tradition. Not. And here's why. I'll give you an example. The French insist that in France, all French people should be able to speak the French language, right?
Okay. If you say so, I'm not sure. Okay.
I mean, it's like, for example, when you name your child in France, you're supposed to pick the child's name off a list of French names. That's how you name children in France. You're not allowed to erode the French culture by, say, raising French children who can't speak French but can only speak English. That would be unacceptable in France, because France wants to retain its identity as a culture, which is reasonable. Although Americans despise that, but we'll come to that in just a second. But
we have a lot of that with our French, like we speak French in Canada as well, and there's a lot of that as well in Canada. So.
Sure, but here's what the French don't say. The French don't say all other languages should be extinct and only French should be spoken all over the world, because that would be absurd to the French. The French aren't concerned with erasing all other cultures. They're just concerned that their own culture be allowed to continue. Mm-hmm. Are you with me so far?
I'm with you so far.
That's not the case in the United States. In the United States, the people who insist that we speak English, and there's a lot of them, God help us, they don't just want all Americans to speak English. They want everybody to speak English. They want the French to speak English. They hate the French language, and they constantly mock the French for daring to preserve their culture. Because the American perspective is there shouldn't be multiple cultures. There should only be one culture, and that culture should be American culture. And the reason why everybody should be an American is because there's no need for diversity. It only leads to confusion. Diversity is bad. We should all be the same. You've heard the phrase Pax Americana?
I have.
So, the founding fathers, as we call them in the United States, deliberately modeled the United States government and society off of not the Greeks, but the Romans. And the Romans had the idea that if they could just stomp all over the world and conquer everybody, and everybody lived like Romans, then we could have peace. And of course, you know what Tacitus said about that. You know the famous Tacitus quote about the Pax Romana?
No.
He said they make a desolation and they call it peace.
Okay, yeah.
They're exterminating people, exterminating cultures and languages and everything, and then saying that because there's nobody left to challenge Rome, that means we're now at peace. This is what all the Americans who want to exterminate all of their languages and cultures and have only English and only American spoken everywhere, these are the same people who refer to the Pax Americana. How we have the most noble government, the best government, we're the most advanced government. And there's really no need for all these other choices. The sooner we get rid of them, the better.
It's even worse. It's even worse. What is America? And the language, the English language actually came from the UK, from Britain. Great Britain. That's not American. American language is Navajo and Sioux and all that. So it's not even authentic.
Well, that's the
American.
thing, right?
You
This
might
is-
find it interesting to know there's a phrase that we Canadians are very aware of and Americans often aren't, called manifest destiny. And this refers to the American belief. I'm not sure if it's in your Constitution, but it's in a
No.
lot of your really important documents.
Yeah.
And this is the doctrine that America has the natural, God-given right to invade Canada and take us over.
Oh, yeah.
So in my last year of high school, my textbook was called Manifest Destiny. And that was like in our last year of high school here for Canadian history.
Yeah.
High school, we study American history, weirdly enough. And that's what we study, how you guys, you know, historically for centuries had the belief that you had the God-given right to wipe us out and take us over and take all of our stuff.
And you say that we believed it for centuries, but the truth is millions of Americans still believe it today. And
Oh, yeah. You were talking about the French. One thing, a particular form of cultural erasure is I lived in the U.S. for a while, and absolutely nobody knew that Canada was French. And even after I told them, nobody would remember that Canada, I think it's something like 38% of Canadians, their first language is French. And
yeah.
and I could be wrong on that number. But
a lot.
yeah, my big point here is just that I feel like America left the European intellectual tradition right before things got good. It's like you left the movie right when things were getting good, right when Kant started being, yeah. I mean, things were just getting good, and you guys left the movie theater.
We did. But see, what Europe has that America doesn't have is Germans have actually been in Germany for over 1,000 years, over 2,000 years. The people who became the Germans arrived in Germany a very long time ago. And the same is true of France. You know, the core population of France has been there for a terribly long time. And the same is true of most of the European countries. What makes European countries what they are is that they have developed in place. According to the climate, according to the land, according to the weather, developing their own clothing styles, their own languages, their own cuisines. The terminology that I use is indigenizing. They're not indigenous yet, but give them a few more thousand years of being there and learning how to live in balance with the land, and they will have successfully indigenized and belong there. Now, that's not the case in the United States. What we do is the opposite. We have contempt for the land. You know, all over the place, for example, when we're fracking, looking for natural gas and other deposits, all that wastewater, you know what we do with it? We dump it into aquifers. We inject it down into fresh water sources and pollute them for thousands of years to come. What we do over time is destroy the land that we're in and make it uninhabitable. And the reason we do that is we have no attachment to the land. To us, the land is just an abstract resource that needs to be cashed out as quickly as possible to raise short-term quarterly profits. And the theory is that we can do that because, you know, next year we'll invade Canada or Mexico or Iraq. And, you know, if we need water, we'll take it from them. There is this attitude in which we believe that we can exist without any specific piece of land and without any long-term harmonious balance with the land. We're pure colonizers. We aren't attached to any place or any time. And if we had our way, we'd take over the whole world and then build starships and take out the rest of the planets as well. That's sort of the American dream.
See what I feel like Rick and I have been hogging the conversation, and is that not okay with some people? Or like I have a response, but I can wait.
Okay, let me kind of lighten up.
Sure.
The discussion. This woman speaks on the phone, and when she's done, in line, when she's done, the guy in line in front of her turns around and says, hey, you know, this is America. You should speak the original language and not Spanish. And she said, sir, I'm speaking Navajo, but if you want us to talk your original language, which is English, you have to go back to Britain.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, this is this theory that we live in, American exceptionalism,
Yes.
is that we are better because we are we. There is no justification other than this is us. And yeah.
Well, and that we can take whatever we want, right? We took this, and next year we take something else.
And
my point about
yes.
My point about leaving the intellectual tradition just when the movie was getting good, as it were, is that there's one particular thing that even progressive politics in the U.S. are so tied to a form of something like libertarian individualism, right? Like I said, my American friends are often shocked at how we Canadians will obey our government, and they see that as us being timid or, not assertive or not individualistic. And I said, well, no, I mean, we picked our government. By following our government, we are following ourselves, right? Like Kant's definition of freedom is, freedom is the ability to follow laws that you yourself make. And I feel like even when in the U.S., when progressive politics happen, it always happens in this very individualistic sense. Like, how can I, as an individual, stop using plastic bags? Or how can I, as an individual, stop eating meat? Or how can I, as an individual, yada, 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 right? And the idea that, well, how can I, as an individual, shape my society so that we have laws that we have to obey? Like that word "we" never quite makes it in. In fact, it's lampooned, and like I think Ayn Rand has a novel called We, which is, and we is said as like the worst possible world. Like I think Ayn Rand at one point called Kant the most evil man who ever lived, which I remember laughing very hard when I read that because he was a sweetie pie apparently. So.
But I mean, that's the point. You do things for humane reasons. Not everything you do is to make money. You aren't in a race to strip Canada dry and leave it barren, and translate every natural and human resource into a number at the bottom of a ledger. That's not. I mean,
there's definitely forces within Canada that want to do that, but that force is called Alberta, in case you're curious.
right.
And then the rest of us fight it, and it's a big waste of money, and big hassles for everybody involved. But we do have forces within our country that resist the urge. Like the idea of just leaving the oil in the ground is a big concept here.
Right. Well, think about France and a French person's relationship to their countryside. Think about a wine grower's love of the land that makes it possible for him to grow the grapes that make the award-winning wines that they've been making for centuries. Do you think his relationship to the land is, I wonder how I can strip mine this? Maybe there's petroleum under here. If I could put less fertilizer in, I could get more bang for buck this quarter. And then before the winery collapses, I could sell it off to somebody else at a fire sale, and then I can retire rich. This isn't how they think about their land, but it's how we think about our land, because we actually don't think it's our land. It's just something we possess for the moment.
Well, this kind of gets me back to my opening point, because I agree that a lot of French people have that attitude, but that attitude in Europe can easily turn fascist, right? And there's an element of that in Canada, like the Quebecois, or the province that's predominantly French-speaking, enacts some truly horrifying laws sometimes, or laws that horrify other parts of Canada. In order to enforce various cultural values, various linguistic values. So this is my point: is that let's say North America in general, can North America handle these sorts of more communitarian values? I don't know. I want to believe that. I want that to work, but.
What we find is that the cultures that preserve more of a concern about the people and about the land, those concerns tend to have deep roots. They go back in history. They come from traditions. And the thing that's interesting about the United States is how many of us are orphans who don't really know our ancestors. Many of us are mutts. Many of us come from broken homes. many of us were prisoners or were escaping the law by jumping ship and going to another country. Although you can find around America, especially on the East Coast, you can find a lot of people who, say, well, I'm a German American and I do all the German holidays and German is my thing. The more you go west, the more you find there's less of that. And people are more like, well, I'm a Seattleite because I live in Seattle until next year when I move to Portland and I'm a Portlander. That they have no deeper roots and they have no deeper connection to the place that they are. And so all that they're left with are these sort of abstract ideas of what it means to live someplace.
But it's the absence of Kant in your society. Like, other than LGBTQ people who do seem to be able to form a community right here and now without some sort of historical roots to it, I mean, that's the absence of Kant. Like, why can't you have a community because you have shared values about clean water or something? Why does it have to be some kind of romanticized thing about your past? Like, I'm of German ancestry, and the less I know about that, the better, Like, yeesh. So, like, that's the absence of Kant in your society. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about, how you left the, not your fault, of course, but, you left the European tradition too soon, and so did English Canada. I mean, it's just because we've got, like, a ton of French people here who kind of keep, that tie to European intellectual tradition that it kind of filters through to the rest of us.
But it's why we're so big on capitalism, right? Because Kantianism, and more specifically, valuing the earth, valuing common shared needs, gets in the way of quarterly profits.
Yeah.
So, what quote makes America great again is that we're willing to exploit other countries, our land, each other, or anything in order to make a quick buck.
Yeah, and to be fair to Canada, to be fair to the U.S., Canada benefits from a lot of the stuff you guys do. We get to seem nice about it, like, the U.S. waged some war. Oh, well, we didn't do it, but we'll still go in and profit from it. So,
Sure.
I'm not claiming we're nice in that regard.
It's not that Canada and Europe aren't modern at all. It's that these countries still retain some vestiges of traditional values. You think people might be worth something other than how much you can cash them out for today.
Well, to go back to what Philip, you talked about the government, there is a certain amount of trust in the government and therefore also compliance, which is exactly the problem here in the US about the pandemic.
Right.
And this cynicism that is also combined absurdly with authoritarianism is because we buy them. Everything is for sale here. The government, we buy our representatives. And the representatives see it as a transaction between those that funded their campaign the most and what they will do in the future. It has nothing to do with the common good or with the idea of the people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the kind of modernism we're talking about, because if you really do put people above nature, like in a purely modern sense, in this sense of modernism, then you have to constantly prove that you're the boss by destroying nature. If you don't destroy it, how can you prove who's in charge?
Okay, as I see it, like what I'm calling like the lack of Kantianism in American society comes about because when you're looking for community, your first thought is to go with ancient traditional communities, right? And that can be a valuable source. But Kant and the sort of later aspects of the Enlightenment and the more mature aspects of modernism showed how you can form communities based on right now. And like I said, in the U.S., LGBTQ2S. We've got more letters than you guys because we have 2S at the end of that for two-spirited for First Nations people.
You can go with I, and there are a lot of letters.
Yeah.
But my point is just like people in let's say queer communities in the U.S. are really good at being good Kantians. They're forming communities based on what matters right now. And I'm saying like that urge to find community based on the past, on tradition, okay, that can be good, but it's also important to form it based on what's happening right now. And that's Kant, and that's what America cut itself off from by leaving the European intellectual tradition too soon.
You know, the thing is, you're giving us too much credit. You're suggesting that we do this out of ignorance. And that would be sweet if it were true. But the thing is, we deploy Kantian arguments in all of our propaganda. We're well acquainted with Kant. We use him to dress up our desire to, you know, pillage each other.
Can you give me an example?
Oh yeah, any political stump speech. You just like literally almost anything Biden says about, you know, why you should vote for Biden, or anything that most politicians in America say about why you should vote for them. If you look at the commercials that Americans produce, but the big corporations to justify the things that they want to do, you know, whatever hideous, heinous thing we want to do to the world or to each other, we know that we can't say, buy my product because I don't care if you live or die. I just want to raise my quarterly profits. That wouldn't go well. So instead, we make some beautiful ad campaign or stump speech or platform for our political party. And it's all full of these Renaissance Enlightenment values. It's full of Kant. It's full of all this wonderful, rational self-interest.
Give me an example of a political stump speech that has a bit of Kant in it.
I hardly know what to say because it's everywhere I turn. It's like
it doesn't have even to go to Kant. Sometimes they say it's exploitation, it's a big business, but you know, if you buy a share in it, you're gonna profit. So they recruit you. You know, we are all part of this system in a way, and you're right, it's not out of ignorance, it's just looking the other way.
I just realized I have to go. This has been an absolute delight, and if anybody wants to message me at the meetup group, it's Philip and my last name Hyland. So go ahead and message me, send me articles, send me arguments, that kind of thing. Okay?
It's been a pleasure. I hope.
Yeah, an absolute pleasure. Yeah. Okay. Talk to you soon. Please message me.
Bye, Philip.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, Philip.
I love these discussions. I love them so much.
Yeah, you know, David, I saw your chat comment. You know, the conversations go all over the place. But, you know, if they're animated and they're enlightening, who cares, right?
I'm not objecting. I'm just saying, you know, I mean, it's just I mean, it's irksome because, we went over this before, but, you know, you have to do it again.
Yeah,
but, you know,
I don't mind going back to it
something
again.
to live with. Yeah.
We figure out new ways to talk about it and explain it. We get new triangulations on it. I'm good with it. I think I explained it better last time, but then that's because I wasn't trying to rush through it.
Yeah, go with the flow.
Yeah. But yeah, I know Kenneth's not a fan of Kant.
Yeah.
But you know, I didn't want to bring that up. You know, Kenneth can come with one of these if he wants to talk about
I was
that.
gonna say, you know, because I'm just choosing these essays completely randomly. I don't know, you know, if we ever wanted to vote on what would we do for upcoming weeks. There's a part 2 for this particular one. Greek
Let's do that.
Archetypes. We would do that.
Yeah, let's do
We
it.
could go with the Contra Kant paper.
Let's do first part 2 of this, and then the next week could be Contra Kant. That'll stir things up.
Fine by me. Yeah. The part 2 of this one, I think, is just more of the same. But
Yeah, that's fine.
yeah.
Well, and
There's a lot
what
to talk
often happens on these calls is you know we start talking about the article for a few minutes, and then pretty soon it immediately takes a
And
turn
again, that's
somewhere
what-
else,
so
right?
I'm fine with that. No, I wasn't wanting to say that I have a tremendous disdain for the free form of the conversation, because that's not the case at all. I do want to just go with the flow and just see what arises.
Yeah, it means they're working, right? It's stimulating discussion and thought.
Yeah, but it's just when it's the same thing over and over again. I just wonder where were we 5 weeks ago.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry to miss the beginning of this. I I haven't ever actually had a COVID-19 test, and it was time, so I ran off and
Oh.
got one. So I guess I'll find out in a couple days.
Oh.
Hopefully my measures have been working and I don't have it yet.
Why did you decide to test now?
So we've been socially isolating, and part of the reason why is we have a cat, a geriatric cat, who needs treatment every other day from a vet spec who comes to our house, and she can't do that if any of us get COVID-19, because she does this for many people, and she works at a vet, so she would spread it far and wide. So she can only come if she knows for certain that we don't have it. And I get bronchitis fairly often, but I haven't had it for the last 9 months. And so yesterday I woke up sort of borderline, and we decided to be very cautious about this and have me go get tested just to be sure, just to put her mind at ease so that, she knows she can keep coming and taking care of Rashid, because he would die in just a couple of weeks without this treatment. So.
All right.
Can you, do you have a house or an apartment?
A house.
So can the treatment be outside the roof, the outside the house, like on a porch? Or?
I don't know. I mean, that's a good question, but so far, I hope I don't ever have to answer that question. I hope it just turns out that we steer clear and she can keep coming.
Well, the social distancing that my friends and I are having involves meeting face to face over 6 feet each with, or if closer with a mask, but outside we live in the country, so in front, in the back, the climate here is wonderful in New Mexico. So on the mountains especially. It's working. I work there. I do my art outside. Very often I take the computer and do my work outside too. And so if you have the ability, I think that can ease the mind of anybody who comes to treat the cat or what.
Yeah, you're right. If it turns out that that either of us, gets it, I think you're right. I'll follow your advice, and we'll see about setting up in the backyard for her. You're smart. Thank you.
Oh, come on. Thank you. Flattery will take you anywhere.
I didn't have, when we were talking about COVID testing and people not wearing masks, I didn't have the heart to tell Philip that it's not that they don't know that they might be killing people, because they flat out say, wouldn't it be great if it just killed lots of people in the blue states, right? You've seen you've seen the quotes from the people who really, really, really hate liberals in America, who are like, I hope they all get COVID and die.
Well, even in the Scandinavia, Sweden, Norway, it's kind of a eugenic thinking. We will kill people, but it's going to be the older generation. We have too many people in the world already. So nature. Oh, yeah.
They're talking like that.
I belong to the generation that is, I made a motion like slitting my throat.
Yeah.
But yeah, they would, some people who are honest, to use the words that you referring to your question before.
Right.
Will admit that this is a kind of way to deal with natural selection.
That's that thing, right? People who are genocidal or eugenicists, they always claim that they're acting on behalf of either God or the forces of progress in nature. They never say, I'm just a shitty person who wants other people to die. they lack the courage of their convictions to admit that they're sociopaths who just want to kill people. It's like, it's gross.
This is you talked about colonialism and all the ideologies and cultures that were enforcing it. And yeah, they are enforcing it, but only humans versus some animals need an ideology to justify their impulse.
Right.
They want to, and that's why animals want to take, they take. But we, and religion is one invention. I mean, the Israelite, I read the Old Testament, at this belief, even at a young age, where the Hebrews finally came to the land of milk and honey. And here God tells them, kill this tribe and that tribe and the Amaleks because they believe in the wrong deity.
Right.
So they are bad. They're evil.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that in the United States. A lot of people believe that what's in those passages justifies, whoever they want to kill. It's like God thinks it's okay. God thinks we should be slaughtering people who, are different from us. It's interesting because the Jewish people I know talk about how the Old Testament, which they don't call the Old Testament, has to be read very differently from the way Christians do. Christians tend to read it as though it's all the law at the same time. Everything that's said anywhere in the Bible holds true. Whereas most of the Jews I talk to about this say, well, what's being described is a history of bargains with God, and that they change over time. And that, for example, the deal that God makes after the flood is that, there's going to be a new law, and some things are not going to be done the same, and we're not going to flood the earth again the way that we did before. And so, it requires a Jew to read those scriptures in a much more intelligent, historically centered way, to think about which of these things applied at what times and to what circumstances, and therefore what applies now. They can't just cherry pick whatever random line out of there they want to and use it to justify present behavior the way that us fundamentalists do in the United States.
Yeah, you're right. Very interesting. It's more dynamic in that way.
Right.
But also open to all those interpretations.
Yes.
That actually, I mean, eventually they justify where you want to go. We read, it's called the Torah, right? The Old Testament. Yeah. So we read the Torah in elementary school, and every page has a text that's only like 25%, and the 75% is interpretation.
Right.
Called Rashi. Yeah. I mean, it's good and it's bad. It's good because it can adjust to modernity or to the needs of life a little better than anything static. But at the same time, it also gives you legitimation for everything on earth.
Right.
And we humans are the only species that need to legitimize our animal behavior.
Yeah, well, and it's because of that great hole we have, that we're a big empty frame, and we're just desperate to fill it with something, and it could be filled with anything. If we're not careful, it's filled with genocide. But if we are careful, it could be filled with love and compassion and stewardship. It's that thing that wolves have that we don't. You go to study a wolf pack anywhere on Earth, and there's going to be variations. I mean, they're all individuals, but none of them says, hey, I've got an idea. Let's exterminate every other wolf on Earth and it'll just be us, right? That's the kind of idea that a wolf literally can't think. It's outside of the frame of wolfiness, but our frame is so empty that, a human being can wake up one day and say, wait, I've got a great idea. Let's kill off all people except those of us in this room.
Well, here you brought another idea. So addiction, we get addicted even to killing. I heard soldiers speak about killing and how traumatic it is the first time, second time. They get over it easily. Third time, no feelings. Fourth time, enjoyment, pleasure. I wonder if animals get addicted to that, or do they kill just for sex, food, or, play?
It probably varies by species. It depends on what they're what their mesh of instincts is that defines the frame of behavior.
Yeah.
So, human beings, this evolutionary deal we got where we have all this freedom and creativity, but it comes at the cost of, you don't know if you're going to get an angel or a demon out of us.
It gets both at different times, different circumstances.
Is a Hitler the price that we pay to have a Martin Luther King Jr.? And I don't mean in a divine sense, but just in an evolutionary sense.
Yeah. It's amazing how many people forgot Hitler and barely remember MLK.
Yeah.
I got to go. And Rick, you always so insightful and so wonderful to talk with you. I sent you a Facebook message a while ago.
I'll look for it.
Yeah, PM. It's probably a week or 2 weeks old.
Okay.
It's a PM.
Thanks, Ayala.
Yeah. Take care, guys.
You too.
Thank you, David.
Always good to have you here.
Thanks.
See you next week.
So, Scott, I can't remember. Are you on Facebook? I seem to remember not.
Yeah, I don't have Facebook. Oh, actually, I do. It's Damian Karras.
Really? Exorcist reference.
But it's supposed to be real because I have this kind of fake church thing that I'm trying to do. It's kind of like, it's trying to be like the Satanic Temple, like super ethical, but with a lot of fun stuff in it, like, eyeliner and heavy metal music. So it's based on the movie Evil Speak. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't.
So I was really big into Subgenius when I was young, and like elaborate pranks that you do with a straight face. I think that's really funny, and I can't get it out of my system. So I thought it was time for me to do something like this. So I wanted to elevate this B horror movie to like super high status. So I made these fake ancestries and the lineages of the pastors and how they came to America. It was so involved. So I made this Facebook website in order to like legitimize the fictitious head of the church. So Damian Karras, so find me. Maybe I can. I think there's like 20 Damian Karrases.
There are. I'm looking at them right now. It's like, there's too many.
Yeah, let's see. I'll send you my particular link. Yeah, I don't have a real Facebook page.
But you've got mine, right?
No.
Let me send you the link here.
How do I?
There it is. Because I post about philosophical and political stuff on Facebook all the time, and science, and art and nature.
Oh, I post about the fake meetings that the non-existent church members at my fake church have, and like what they were eating for the lunch break and stuff like that. Let me see here.
God, Scott, you're a riot.
Yeah, I need it. I'll take Kratom and Adderall, and I'll feel very confident about my very funny, interesting ideas. And then a few days later, I'll be depressed. I'll start thinking about more substantial issues like homelessness and cops shooting by people for fun. And I end up not getting much done.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Okay, I'm pasting your stuff in here. All right.
Julio.
Oh,
and David periodically posts, not just links to these, but also extracts from Kenneth Smith works and other philosophers.
Yeah, that was a good discussion today, but I just, you guys dug into something. There was I hate when there's no argument, but there seems to be one, and then it goes on for an hour and a half.
Yes.
And it seemed, and I was like, oh shit, I had nothing to contribute. So I started to meditate, and then I tried to be productive. Yeah.
I serve on a standards committee for a programming language, and we used to talk. We coined the phrase "being in violent agreement" for when there's this huge energetic discussion that sounds like an argument, but when you look closer, it turns out nobody actually disagrees. It's just
you could tell both you guys were sensible. You're both left-leaning, which means you're rational. So there's really no argument there. Oh, and then the woman at the beginning with her defense of the Bible thing, I was like, please, God, let it be. please let there be someone who's going to defend religion here and say that evolution was just a theory. And then she seemed to kind of say that, so I got excited about that. But then that was diffused, and she was won over by you and the Canadian guy. No, you very smartly like brought her in with the yes and method of improv. I thought that was very good.
Soft positional bargaining.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I love those religious debates, but you can't make any progress because you know how it's going to end. But I guess I was looking forward because usually in these meetings, everyone's more or less in agreement. But it seemed like here was someone who was going to defend God against the superficial, like man worshiping, what do they call it? Man's science, man's knowledge. That's just man's knowledge. I was hoping for a man's knowledge moment.
Yeah, sometimes I don't take gambits on these calls when there are so many issues simultaneously raised and they're all propping each other up in a complicated series. And I'm like, maybe if we had a week, we'd have enough time to really do justice to the sheer volume of separate issues that have all been thrown out there together. But there's just no way in 10 minutes or, 2 hours to really do justice to the, construction that's been built there. And then I'm like,
it's a popular argument I noticed with, there's some Chinese students in the U.S. that are trying to be fundamentalist Protestants, and so they say the same thing. Micrologically, at the level of the cell, sure, something like physics is in command, but once you zoom out and you get speciation, we need to save Yahweh from you amoralists.
Yeah,
and then she did it. That's what she's saying. Like when you zoom into the cell, sure, okay, physics is God here. But when you zoom out far enough, no, biology. The biosphere itself requires intervention, and that's how we're going to secure God, morality, and everything like that.
Yeah, I'm alert to the fact that evolutionary biology is one of my things, and I could easily hijack the whole conversation, for weeks on end, talking about the theoretical framework for why evolution exists on a macro scale. But if I did that, then we wouldn't be able to talk about all these other interesting subjects. So I'm like, I try not to take those gambits. I'm like,
She said we don't have anything, and I wanted to say, well, what about the fossil record? But I knew exactly what she would say. Yes, those were already molded by God. Those forms, and God seemed to make horse forms that were fitting in between. But we don't really have a continuum, do we? We have these leaps, and so that's really not evidence for the gradual type of thing that you evolutionists in your man's knowledge want.
Yeah, I don't know if whether or not that's where she in particular would have gone, but I certainly agree with you. I've heard that line and debated it numerous times. It depends so much upon drawing that line between micro and macro and then denying you drew it. It's like it's Hegel in a nutshell. It's his argument against abstraction. It's like, but look what you just did. You took this whole field of evidence and you just drew an abstract line between them, and then you denied that you did it and said, no, that's how it actually is. They really are these two categories.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's like, no, there aren't. You just like, I'm watching you. Your mouth is moving, and essentially your finger is coming down, drawing that you're doing it. That line doesn't exist except in your head and in this conversation. Now that you've drawn it between micro and macro, but if we erase that and just look at nature as it actually exists, then we see that things move across that line, and but there are two different categories, and that yeah. I think a big part of it is just people can't visualize millions of years. They just can't. We're not built for it. And so when you try to talk to people about processes that take millions of years, only some people are going to be able to make that creative leap, and other people are going to be like, no, there's no such thing. Nothing that takes that long could be real. Only things that happen in a short frame could be real.
Right. And come to think of it, that line drawing act is something that we do unconsciously when it comes to like consciousness in physics.
Right.
Like you zoom in, you say, oh, surely at the level of these atoms bouncing around, there's no soul here. Ghosts aren't involved. But when we zoom out, we just say, oh, okay, when it's sufficiently complicated And then the black box openness for free will arises.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, there's a correlation between zooming out, fuzziness, and permission.
Right. Right. And part of it's because our conception of free will is so absurd. The fact that we envision it as arising from the soul or the spirit or some ghostly thing, all of those attempts to do that, all they really are is attempts to say, I don't really know what it is. It must be coming from a magical place. And so there needs to be a magical thing that is the holder for free will. And that's how we know free will exists. But if you turn the whole discussion around and say, well, you can't have freedom to make a choice about things that you don't know exist or are possible, right? I mean, if you've got a light switch that turns on the light in the garage, but you've never discovered that light switch and you don't even know there is one, you can't make a choice about whether to turn the light on or off in the garage. And you don't even know there, and partially it's because you don't even know there's a choice to make. You think, however, the garage seems to be at the moment is inherent to its nature, and it must always be that way. It's only the discovery of new possibilities that makes it possible to make choices about those possibilities. And so we come back to that whole issue of, until the intellect is turned around to look back at itself critically and to begin to categorize itself and see how it does things and how it makes choices, until that moment, there can't be any such thing as free will. It's literally, we're not perceiving ourselves, and therefore we can't make choices about ourselves. We're too busy looking outward and making choices about what we're going to put on our sandwich. And then that changes the discussion, because then people can start to imagine free will as an actual tangible, definable thing that doesn't require some magical thing to make a magical free will choice happen. It's like, no, there is a tangible kind of freedom that you can have or not have that's measurable. You have to know a thing exists and that it's manipulable. We can all experience that in our lives, right? We all have times when we have an aha moment, go, oh my goodness, you mean that's a real thing? And suddenly it's like, Disney World is real? I want to go there. It's like, I couldn't choose to go to Disney World before I discovered it existed, but now I'd like to make a choice. Yes, sir. I would like to exercise my newly discovered free will. Space Mountain, please.
Oh my God. So I'm from Miami, and our school went to Disney World every year at like 4 a.m. on sometime during the fall. And we discovered that if you walk backwards against the arrows when you get off Space Mountain, that you'll end up on the Alpha line. So we ended up doing Space Mountain 36 times, my friend Reed and I. It was like the most fun we've ever had. I mean, I worship Space Mountain because it was the only roller coaster I've ever experienced. I worship Space Mountain, Haunted Mansion, and Pirates of the Caribbean. I love the smell of the Pirates of the Caribbean and the gift shop. Those skulls with the hair, I love those. And the Haunted Mansion I loved until the kids started spinning on the glass where they projected. Then you could see that the ghosts weren't real because you could see the spit that it was flying through, the light was going through. But Space Mountain, oh my God. I knew it was a ride, but part of me thought, I mean, it was a really magical. I mean, this is like when I was 14, I guess.
Yeah.
I should have known better, but it was like a religious experience for me to go on Space Mountain.
Right? Look at you exercising your free will. You made a discovery and suddenly you could make a choice and you're like, I know which choice I want to make. Again.
Yeah. Oh my God. Do you remember the Debbie Harry thing at the end of the ride? Like the world of the future, and they had the Debbie Harry videos playing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that occupies an important place in your unconscious mythology. When you sleep at night, sometimes you dream and you go back to Space Mountain.
Well, I might if I were in a better mental state, because now Reed and I aren't talking. Yeah. I don't know what happened. He wrote this book called The Real. It's about independent filmmaking. The Real something. I mean, it's like an undergraduate textbook now. I couldn't believe it. He became very accomplished. His mom cut him off financially. And then he just got really strong and then started doing all sorts of amazing stuff. He became a lecturer at Harvard, and then he taught at Columbia. But the whole time he was like asking for money and about to be homeless. Anyway, so that's why I'm a little bit sad about Space Mountain now, because I think about Reed.
Right. You need new Space Mountain memories.
That's right.
I wonder if that trick would still work of walking backwards against the arrows and getting back in the alpha line.
I don't know. I mean, I couldn't believe that everyone wasn't doing it.
Yeah. We went to Disneyland and we went with a friend who knew all the tricks. And she said, one of the tricks is to plan ahead what rides you want. And then you go get the ticket to get on that ride at that time. Because every ride has 2 lines. And one line is for the people who didn't plan ahead, and that line goes on forever. And one is for the line for the people who got the ticket to show up at this time to ride the ride at this time. And that line's incredibly short. You just walk right up and give them the ticket and get on. And so all these people are spending all day long in lines at Disneyland because they wouldn't plan ahead or because they didn't know that you could do that. And meanwhile, we're just running from ride to ride to ride, spending the whole day riding things and snatching tickets in between for the one that we're going to do after the one that we're going to do now. And I couldn't believe it. It was like that one piece of knowledge just completely transformed the experience, right? That's like a metaphor for life. You know, if you know the options that are there, the better options, you could have a completely different life than if you don't know.
That's right. Yeah, that's an interesting subject. Like learning what you can do, but then not doing it anyway because the anxiety of the novelty of it prevents you. I've noticed that in myself. It's like I clearly know what my to-do list should be for the day, and I know what my tasks are, but the most important ones cause like some kind of discomfort in my torso, and so I don't do them, and I do these bullshit side things, and I see myself in the act of avoiding my top priorities, and I still do it anyway. That really makes me ill.
Right. Yeah, having had, I've got type 2 bipolar, which is the one where you just go in and out of depression. And so it's called bipolar, but you don't really have a manic stage. You just have a stage where you're not depressed. And it's like everybody around you's like, wow, you seem really up. It's like, yeah, it's because I'm normal right now. It's like for a change, I feel something. So going through that and watching myself during depressive phases, being unable to make the choices that would make me feel better because I'm too depressed to do them, really did a number on preparing me to understand the Greek perspective on free will. It's like, I'm sure there are other people who get exposed to the Greek perspective on free will who just brush it off and go, I don't know about that. Doesn't seem interesting. But, for me, suddenly it just opened the doors and explained all kinds of things in my life. They all came into focus and I went, these guys are sharp.
Yeah.
They can explain how you could simultaneously have and not have free will at the same time, which none of the other models could do. They're all too simple.
Yeah, consciousness is tricky. It seems transparent to itself.
Right.
And the space seems transparent. So it's like it's nothing but transparency. I can see anything, I can do anything. But then your interior is just full of sympathetic, nervous, swampy horror. And so one part of you is like, I am Euclid. I can move my body from here to there. Just move my hand. Fill out the resume. I see what I need to do. And then just all these like swampy demons and terrified reptile brain creatures are inside of you, and they're not part of the transparency, but they're running things.
Yeah. I've got this model of the unconscious in which each of us has our own personal mythology. There's certain mythological figures, loom large and have an effect on us. There's certain monsters we're afraid of or scary places. There's certain attractive places we want to go to. And maybe in our dreams, we go back to some of these places. We find over the course of our lives, we have recurring dreams where we keep returning to certain situations. And
yeah. I wonder how deep that goes, because I had a near-death experience on laughing gas, nitrous oxide.
Oh my God.
When I was 16, we were so stupid. We didn't know that the dentist mixed it with oxygen. So we were doing it straight with no air between. But the same thing as getting brain damage.
Right.
So if you don't breathe oxygen for about 4.5 minutes, you actually do get irreversible brain damage. So
right.
It's so stupid. So we would do a box of these things, and then when we were unconscious, our friends would force feed us more of it from a balloon.
No.
Yeah, it was really stupid. So during one of these like near-death things, I was gone, and it was the most pleasant experience I've ever had. And I realized, and you see this when you watch the Discovery, you know, I don't know, the History Channel, I guess, is the new Age channel where they pretend to do history, but they just talk about ghosts and stuff.
Right.
But
right.
if you interview these people, they're all like, don't be afraid of death. It's the most pleasant experience, but you will regret not doing things. And that always stuck with me. So people, when they die and they come back, everything's fine, except they remember all the times they had a chance to do something and they chickened out. So they said, I never regretted anything I did, but I regretted immensely the things I didn't do. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. That's a really interesting type of judgment, because you think it might be otherwise. Like I guess in the Christian version, it's transgression that gets punishment. But in ontological reality, it's self-limitation that gets punished. And it's really, really intense. Anyway, so I was on laughing gas, and first there was the Ein Sof, and then I congealed to the point where there was something that was figurative, like there was a self and there was distance and there was others. So there's the possibility of plurality in objects and stuff like this. And they were Ewoks. It was so clear that heaven is really a dense network of branch-like things, which are kind of like trees, and these friendly type things, which are kind of like Ewoks. And I realized that my true nature was an Ewok among Ewoks. And Terence McKenna talks this way when he talks about his psychedelic experiences. Like, basically, it's a very joyful ecosystem, and actually, people are more playful and infantile than you would imagine in your mature, whatever inherited mythology that you have. Reality is more playful and elfish and stuff. And it was really true. And then something happened. I started receding from the heaven, and I was so panicked. And I said, you must never forget this. I was like, you son of a bitch, you must never fucking forget this. I was like, I know I'm gonna forget. So I held on to this silly caricature of the experience, which I'm now describing as the trees and the Ewoks. And I saw it happening. I was like, this is not Ewoks. This is not trees. But it was the only way I could get it, as I started to zoom out from the Death Star and then leave that thing. What a great experience that was. Too bad it required brain damage, though. I regret that part.
Well, and now you're a philosopher, so sorry, man. Brain damage will make you a philosopher.
I suppose. Yeah, that's what I tell people. They're like, why do you study philosophy? I was like, I took too many drugs when I was a kid. I mean, and that's probably the reason. I had some really, really bad trips on acid. I mean, really devastatingly terrifying trips where I thought that the universe hated me, God hated me. And then in order to handle those trips, I had to read. So that's the reason. Probably it's actually true.
Gotta have that drive to question things. I suspect that people whose lives are too comfortable could never become a philosopher, because they never had any reason to question what they were raised in. There's got to be, well, this is what Kenneth Smith says too. There's got to be a crisis to provoke you to ask the questions that nobody wants to ask, which is like, how do I even know the things I think are important matter? What if I care about the wrong things? It's like most people do not want to ask that.
Because it's effort is uncomfortable. So in order to expend effort, you have to have a motivation.
Yeah. Aeschylus, right? In Agamemnon. Drop by drop, wisdom is distilled from pain. The longer quote is even more powerful, but that's always the nugget at the core of it.
Yeah, that's good. It's good. That's good. It's important for me, like during my depressive phases, to see the value. I mean, and that's why Christianity is so popular, I think, because Christianity really valorizes suffering. God himself suffered, and in the process helped everyone out. It was the greatest possible heroic deed. The most heroic thing of all is this voluntary suicide with a smiling face, helping the others. So it's important for me, because I can't take the Christian symbolism literally and historically. It's good to have something while you're in the suffering to say, no pain, no gain, or through this comes growth, something like that.
What can I see now that I couldn't see before? That's what I do with my depressive phases. They don't scare me or frighten me anymore, because now I've sort of come to a point in my life where I recognize that if I'm depressed, there's a reason why I'm depressed. And it's not just that I'm prone to depression, because the timing is variable. It's like, it's not an even cycle. I can go quite a while without a depressive, drop. It depends on my life and what's happening and how I'm feeling about things. And often it's something that I need to deal with that I haven't been dealing with. Some difficult choice or difficult realization that I've been dodging that's finally reaching a crisis point to where, you know, it's untenable and I have to find it and examine it. And what I find is if I do that work while I'm depressed, which I can, because when I'm depressed, the one thing I can do is, you know, mull over things. You know, I don't find any difficulty in ruminating over things when I'm depressed. So, you know, if I direct that instead of letting it just be free throwing and, you know, self-loathing and turn it instead into what's bothering me, what is it that I'm not happy about in my life, I can often find the thing. And if I look at it, it's clear it's not some artificial claim that this is what did it. It's like, no, actually, that has been the big problem for the last 6 months, and I haven't dealt with it. And I kept hoping I could ignore it, and I can't ignore it. And so when I get out of the depression, I have the ability to act again. I fix that thing. And then it postpones even further how long it is before the next drop. So it turns out to be like a gift, but sure didn't feel that way for the first 30 years.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, I got really depressed after my girlfriend and I broke up. I started taking Kratom. Have you heard of this?
No.
Kratom. They call it Kratom in Texas.
I don't know it.
Oh, Kratom. It comes from the coffee family of plants. Anyway, it's not an opioid, but it's an opioid analog. So it's legal. You can buy it anywhere in most states. And so I saw a website and it said, "Are you depressed? You know, are you procrastinating? Be productive and get your shit done with Kratom." And I was like, really? Okay, I'll give it a try. And so I didn't feel anything for like the first month, but then I stopped taking it. I felt like super depressed and I was sweating and I was crying a lot. And then I took it and I felt so much better. I was like, oh, this stuff really works. But then in a way, I guess it made me more productive. But then I realized it was killing that thing that you were just talking about, which was like the dark messenger that tells you to change course.
Right.
Because it kills the pain. And so you could, I mean, like your apartment, your piles of garbage were like heaping up around me in my apartment. I was like, wait, this isn't like me. And suddenly my friends were calling me back. I was like, wait, what's happening? And I realized that I'd become like a self-pleasuring escapist who didn't feel pain anymore. And so everything was fine.
Right. Well, isn't that the paradise of Brave New World? Let us all take Soma. and yeah, I think you're right. That's the big critique against, you know, overuse of painkillers or anything else that makes us happy is what about the things that are actually problems that we really should be bothered by and turn and address?
That's right. And emotional pain and physical pain are the same genus of thing. So when you kill the physical pain, you're also artificially rewarding yourself for nothing. There's no reason. The reward should come for some progress. So you're being prematurely rewarded constantly, and I realize that's super dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. These are difficult things. You know, it's like Aristotle, when talking about the golden mean, tries to get people not to take it simplistically. He talks about the way the golden mean is probably not in the middle, that it depends on which two things you're comparing. It might be in the middle, but it might be all the way towards one side because one thing might be more of a problem than the other. And so the golden mean has to be adaptive, you know, and fit its circumstances. And you can sort of infer from that he would have been completely on board with the idea that it's also dynamic and shifting, right? Because if the golden mean is in different places based on what the things are you're comparing, then as those things change, then the mean ought to change too. But nevertheless, when people take they think they're taking his advice, they end up trying to become just centrist moderates. They'll just, you know, I have to choose between this Nazi who really likes death camps and this Nazi who thinks death camps are not a good idea. So I'm going to be in favor of, you know, only a few death camps that are small. That's the moderate position. It's like, you know, it's like the ability to caricature, you know, it's a natural response to life being so complex and dynamic and shifting and multidimensional. You know, people can lose their confidence and decide that they're not going to try to engage with it all because they think it's too hard. They can't keep up with it. They can't figure out how to adapt to it.
So what's the alternative?
Well, then they just want a recipe, right? I want something to tell me what to think. Yeah. Well, you get two real different camps, right? One camp says don't think Don't think too much. You see this on Facebook all the time, those memes that say, don't think, just type your immediate answer to the following 17 questions. Don't think, don't think, don't think. And those are the people who also say, live as though each day is your last. Don't ever plan. Don't ever think ahead. Just, live for right now. And that's one extreme response, is to say life's too hard to think about, so don't think. And of course, we know what that leads to. I mean, there's a lot of Darwin Awards associated with that model. but the typical other response that America suffers from is the whole, somebody else will think for you and they'll write down the recipe and you will follow the recipe like a little machine. You'll just follow the algorithm, do what the machine says. It will give you all the answers, and then you don't have to think. They're both ways not to think. And the thing that both groups seem to be desperately trying to avoid is, what if you actually engage with life like for real? And yes, things change, and when they change, you pay attention and you try to adapt your behavior to the change. And when you move to different circumstances, you adapt. And yeah, you're going to screw up a lot, but do your best. Try to learn from your screw ups.
Yeah.
It's like that model we have in elementary school of punishing people for getting wrong answers, I think sets them up for the wrong approach to life, because then they think it's, making a mistake is bad.
That's right. That's right. Because you might be punishing them for trying without certainty.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I've become a pussy lately with other people's judgment. Yeah. I don't know what happened. I used to not care, and now I'm just like, I don't know what's going on. Who knows? But yeah, I'm also not trying, doing the safe thing, repeating patterns. Jeez, I don't know.
Well, it's easy to get stuck in this because, we are on the one hand mimetic, so we really care what's going on around us and what people think of us, and we want to imitate and fit in. But on the other hand, Kenneth Smith also talks about the soul being like a horse, that you can't just beat it into submission or you break it. That the horse really has a spirit of its own and doesn't want to just be dragged from one place to the next, and wants to be a participant and have consent and agency in what it chooses to do. And so we find ourselves in this tug of war between, I don't need you, I can make my own choices, and actually I wish you wouldn't all hate me all the time. We're stuck between caring and not caring. And I don't know if there's a resolution, or if that's just, here we are. we get to enjoy that tug of war all life long. I have it. I share it with you. I'm not in any way trying to belittle it. I have exactly that struggle. I have a close friend on Facebook who I worked with for decades, who turns out to be a Trump supporter. and for the life of me, he's so intelligent on so many other issues, and he's so compassionate in person, and trying to reconcile that with saying that he really agrees with Trump's policies. I'm like, how can you be that person? It's like, and how can I care about somebody who thinks concentration camps are okay, and that some people should be bullied?
Well, each of those Trump stupid mistakes that he makes is aided by his handlers making up of some good sounding metaphysics to explain it away. So if Trump does they'll say, oh, he's doing America first, with the tariff, he's protecting workers' interests. It's like, so every fucked up thing he does looks like, let's see. He thinks that we should basically execute anti-fascists.
Right.
What's the good spin on that? Well, we can't have our cities burning. We can't have all this looting.
Right.
So that's how you can like Trump. If you redefine peaceful protest as looting, then I guess it's just a matter of equivocation. It's an equivocation battle.
And I get these people who will tell me about how, blue cities are in flames and all of the businesses have been smashed, and, it's just completely lawless. And I look outside and none of that's happening. And I could take a photo and show it to them. They're like, well, you just chose that moment. You're just trying to make it look good. We know, with no evidence, we know what's true. Don't you try to confuse us with your evidence. And you think on the one hand, well, I should just disregard these opinions because they're completely not reality based. But on the other hand, some of these are people I know, and I thought I knew, and I have to wrestle with the question of how does a person get into that space, and are we still able to communicate? I can't actually just erase them from my mind and from my caring, because we're all in this together, and some of us think the rest of us should be dead. And how do we overcome that? What do we do about that? So like you, I mean, that's what I'm talking about. I'm caught between wanting not to care but also actually caring.
Yeah, that's right. You can't run and hide. Like my Rick, the professor at Duke, used to bring up Hegel in this regard and say, Hegel's advice when you come up with one of these problems is to tarry with death and devastation for a while.
Yeah.
To hang with it. Don't resolve it so quickly.
Yeah.
So when there's a knot or a problem, I mean, we would love there to be easiest solution, but maybe the best thing would be for you to sit in front of the horror and hold its hand and let all your maps dissolve due to their inability to handle it, and then come up with new ones.
Yeah. So I thought I would tackle it by, I've been working on a system of ethics. My wife and I, Beverly and I, have been working for some years on putting together a framework for ethics that doesn't require, it neither requires nor disputes the existence of God. It says it's completely separate from the question of supernatural aspects of religion, is the question of, how can you be a good person? And what constitutes being good? And how do you evaluate people's behavior or your own behavior to figure out right from wrong from other dimensions? It's not like those are the only two choices. And then how do you use something like that to come up with a political platform? How would you evaluate, if the Democrats publish a platform, the GOP publishes a platform, some other party publishes a platform, how would you evaluate them ethically? What would be valid? What would be a valid analysis that allows you to say which of the core virtues are being embodied here and which ones are being betrayed? How could you criticize it specifically in order to say, not just I like it or I don't like it, or my people are for it?
You're looking for an algorithmic procedure. You're looking for a decision procedure. You make your principles explicit, and then you pass a policy through the system, and then you just have the user agree. And so even a redneck can get on your website and say, yeah, I agree with this. I agree with this. Agree with this. So if the redneck agrees with all the premises, then you pass like a couple paragraphs through a Trump site through, and then you'll see the result, and then there can't be disagreement. I think that's a great idea. I think maybe spelling out and making explicit and simplifying like proper inference.
Yeah.
Something like that. There's got to be a way, because you can imagine a redneck agreeing with, we should be kind. Okay. I agree that we should be kind. I mean, and he'll begrudgingly go down the list, and then all sorts of conclusions will pop out that will contradict his affiliations. So maybe if you could open that up and have like a self-unpacking mirror experience webpage for rednecks, that could be something.
I thought it'd be like a logic for ethics. It would tell you if something's ethically valid. If you say you're in favor of the following virtues, but this is the behavior you're engaging in, then it's not ethically valid. And here's the reason why. You can see it right here. This is the part that's.
That'd be great. We should have that, and we should have voting be done online, and we should be able to distinguish. Every politician should have like an actual policy page where things are actually listed. It won't be by him. And then all this bullshit rhetoric and fantasy and marketing imagery and all that other stuff that usually trumps everything else. So yeah, have the real. So you'll say yes. I hate black people and let's shoot them for fun. I love that part. But then over here it says white people will make less money per year. Oh God, And then they might decide differently.
I thought at least it would be a way to maybe change the discussion. Because right now the discussion isn't, all that's really happening is America's just sort of polarizing into camps that are getting ready to kill each other. Well, one side's getting ready to kill the other. I'm less clear whether the one side is, well, we just want to turn the other cheek while you shoot us, is sort of a problem.
Yeah.
We need some basis for discussion other than God hates your ideas. And that's the problem with linking. I think traditionally having linked morality to deity, it leads people to believe that if they were to debate or discuss morality, they would be betraying God. And if their religion is set up on apocalyptic principles that say, if you make the wrong choices, you aren't just punished a little bit, and you certainly aren't taught and corrected and encouraged. Instead, you are tortured until the end of time for all eternity. But if you get it right, you're rewarded until the end of time for all eternity. It's like the stakes have been raised to infinity.
Yeah.
And I think it makes people crazy.
I'm
And
not
so
sure. I wonder what percentage of Christians really believe that. Even the ones that we think do, like these Trump people that think it's okay for Trump to like sleep with the prostitutes and cheat on his wife. I mean, that shows you that they don't really believe in the reward punishment scheme, because otherwise they'd be terrified for Trump.
Well, I mean, the first thing we have to do is address the fact that, we can't really say what Christians think because it's an enormous diversity. There's so many different belief systems that call themselves Christian, and some of them believe exactly opposite things. So, we have to frame in who exactly we're talking about. But as far as the people who say that they support Trump because they believe that the Bible authorizes him, or validates him, part of the basis that they do it on is not on perfect behavior. They don't tend to come from sects that put behavior first. They tend to come from sects that put salvation first.
Even King David cheating on his wife. They always use that when Falwell and Trump do stuff like that. They're like, hell, King David was the most loved person. He was the biggest asshole. He killed his best friend and fucked his best friend's wife. That's exactly right. What's important is the policy. Trump is anti-abortion, and that's more important than the fact that he's unethical, asshole, and evil. Yeah.
Right. And that's certainly one of the enormous splits within Christianity itself that I know Christians talk about, because it's a seemingly unresolvable problem, which is the faith and good works, man. It's like, what is the balance between faith and good works? And, on the one hand, you can see why people said you can't just do shallow good works and try to fool everybody into getting into heaven if you're a bad person. And so they would emphasize faith. It's like, no, God sees who you really are. But on the other hand, if you overemphasize faith, then people are like, so I can do anything I want, but as long as I follow this little catechism, I have my get out of hell free card. So there's an enormous struggle around this within Christianity. And we're sort of seeing it in the polls in the electorate. I think this may be another case where you need an Archimedean standpoint. It just may be unresolvable in its own terms. And so something from the outside, like here is an ethical logic that allows us to begin talking about right and wrong, not in terms of what God says, but in terms of what's right and wrong. There's what God says, and don't, that's fine. Keep track of what God says. But here's this other metric that we can use to ask questions. So we can say, how does the behavior of Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, compare to the behavior of Yahweh when, he tells the Israelites, I'd like you to massacre all these people and take their land? You could evaluate them ethically according to a metric, right? And then see that there's a difference between these two encounters. That lumping them together and saying, well, they're both God, is causing us to become ethically confused because it's erasing distinctions that matter.
Yeah, but these apologists, they'll say, well, that's a profound mystery, and it's not meant for man's knowledge to wrap itself around. God seems to be an asshole here, but can we really fathom his ways? It could be that the Jews really did have to kill all the infants and the women and the children and the animals and even burn the plants over there across the way. God said it. So the infallibilists, there's no way they'll never.
They might not. They might be stuck right inside their claustral envelope. They might, but not everybody's an infallibilist. And so you get some people to the party talking about this, and then it can become a more widespread tool.
Yeah,
Peer,
yeah, that's right.
Peer pressure is a thing. You know, it's like how many things are accepted by modern civilization that were ruled out by the medieval church as heresy. But, you know, they caught on and spread, and the medieval church had no choice but to say, well, Jesus, I guess we have to acknowledge that maybe the earth is not the center of everything.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. Ignore my pessimism. You should. We should at least try, and maybe the moderates will infect the fundamentalists, and something will happen.
Yeah, this is another place where I'm a meliorist. So, I think maybe it, you know, having gone through bipolar is what made me be neither an optimist nor a pessimist, because when you're depressed, you tend to be pessimistic, and when you're not depressed, you tend to be optimistic if you've been depressed a lot. And so what happens is you discover the limitations of both perspectives, because you're constantly running into problems of your own making, and you discover that you can make the problems at both ends of the cycle. So neither end of the cycle really works. So, you know, my meliorist perspective is I'll leave optimism and pessimism to all those other people who maybe have a better grasp on the future than I do. I know I don't have a good grasp on the future, but what I do know is, you know, as a lifelong programmer, I know that I can take a buggy piece of software and fix some of the problems in it. And I can't say whether the result will be good enough or bad, you know, or too bad to use, but I can say that the end result will definitely be better than it is right now. That's the level of control I have. Is I can.
That's very, very good. That's very good. I should do that. I'm trying to force myself to think more like that by being a fascist inside this silly self-help system. God, this guy in Germany turned me on to this. So, you know, Notion, it's a relational database software.
No.
Oh, so this guy developed a life operating system inside of Notion where you have at the top, you have like your value, your value goals. And then you have like your actual goals. And then you have like the parts of like your life you need to take care of, like legal issues, money, work, you know, and then you have all the little nitty gritty tiny things that make up your hourly activities. And so what you want to do is make sure that your day is full of little tiny actions. So you want to make sure that little tiny actions are somewhere inside this pyramid and connecting with goals that you actually give a shit about, instead of like eating Doritos and watching the Flintstones or something like that. It's easy to get lost doing stupid shit like that because that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking about, can I really give myself, like, they call it implementation intentions in EdPsych. You make a plan, and then you have like little steps, and you break the steps into tiny steps, and pretty soon it's no longer an anxious like trek up the mountain. It's just one tiny, like almost pleasant task after another. And so my dream is to turn my goal realization into a set of tiny, tolerable tasks, and then I can actually get things done. But I can't make the transition. It's like as soon as I think about how much I care about the endpoint, I freak out.
Right, there's too much at stake. You're still treating it as a whole.
That's right. So it's really, so I'm trying to trick myself into being able to digest the great and the important into the practical and doable. I mean, that's all I need to do, right? And my life would be a success.
You work in software?
Well, not really. I mean, I love coding, and I just updated my big export. I made this silly export system for Tinderbox. You know Tinderbox?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So you did that, huh?
So yeah, I'm the guy that made the generic universal export system for Tinderbox. It took me, I don't know, like 2 years, and then I released it. The people realized how great it was, and they said I was an important, like I was like Buckminster Fuller. And other people in the Tinderbox forum were like, "This fucking asshole, who do you think he is? This son of a bitch is setting defaults. This motherfucker thinks he can set defaults. I decide the defaults, asshole." And I was like, "No, in order for the system to run out of the box, you have to have some default settings."
Right.
And they were being so dicks about it.
Feel free to change them. Whatever. They're just defaults.
Yeah.
It needs something.
But they hurt me so much, and I disappeared for like 3 years. And so this guy in Germany was like, "You shouldn't let these assholes troll you." And I was like, "Yeah, you're right." But I still couldn't do it. There was too much cortisol and adrenaline in my chest, and it just hurt too much.
Right.
So he walked me through, and he would make me make videos and tutorials, and then he would criticize them. And then finally I released a video, and then the piece of shit, he said, what's the use case for this? I mean, like, that's like asking, what's the use case for Emacs? I mean,
Right.
it was just, it's the most generic possible thing. It's just a bunch of open variables. You fill them in yourself. It does anything you want.
Right.
And so that piece of shit was a little less shitty after I made my video. And I thought, well, maybe it's possible. Maybe it's possible. That shows how neurotic I've become. It's like, if people don't appreciate what I do, I just want to kill them on the spot. I think that's a healthy mindset.
Response to trauma, right? I'm
Yeah.
familiar. I'm familiar with this. Yeah, because when you were describing the life goals approach, my brain was going, "Well, this is typical algorithmic problem breakdown. You must be working in software." It's like the people, those are because I am, right. So I recognize, that approach to problem solving. It's like, how do we break the big problem into little problems and then break them into smaller problems, and sooner or later we have a problem we can actually solve.
Yeah, that's right. I need to apply it to my life. I mean, I'm so good at like knowing what to do and not implementing it in my actual life with my actual actions. It's like I'll even make a to-do list in detail, using org mode or whatever. I'm like, what a fucking awesome to-do list this is. Then I'll watch Columbo and eat a bunch of tuna fish. I mean, I just do stupid shit like that all the time. Nothing is more dangerous for me than Columbo and tuna. I could eat tuna and watch Columbo forever.
He's great, isn't he? Peter Falk, man. Just one more thing.
I love it. It's so great. I mean, I watched it as a kid, but now I downloaded on BitTorrent all 13 seasons.
Yeah.
And I promised myself I wouldn't watch them all. I'd save them for like comfort viewing, special treats, rewards for getting things done, and things to watch with my girlfriend when she finally moves in. But I couldn't stop it because I'm just a glutton or something's wrong with me. I watched all of them, and now I'm watching them again. In fact, when I finish this phone call, I'm probably going to end up eating some tuna and watching another Columbo episode.
Well, you could do a lot worse. I mean, I love the inversion of the whole concept of a detective story. It's like, no, we're going to start by showing you how it was done. You're going to see who did it and how it was done. That's not the mystery. The mystery is, what did they get wrong? Why are they going to get caught? And I thought that is a great mystery to focus on.
Right. And it was so bold of those guys, Levin and the other guy, to come up with that. I really admired that. I really admire them. And I love the characters so much. I mean, I hate cops. I mean, not me personally, but my best friend. If he had a button that would destroy all the cops, he would probably press it. But with Columbo, that's somebody. I mean, what a great guy. Can you imagine having him as a friend? He's so, at least for the first like 8 seasons, he's so self-deprecating and genuinely concerned. And even when the person's guilty, he sees the humanity behind it and he affirms them. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, he takes them by the hand together. Together they go off to, take him to face justice.
He's like, well, it seems to me that if someone did this to me, I would want to kill them. I would be hurt if they threatened to destroy my life's work.
Yeah, right.
He's not an asshole fascist cop that wants to give death penalty to everyone. He sees that there's some situations are really full of massive concern, massive care, massive consequences.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm watching The West Wing again from the beginning, and it's politics porn. It's how we wish American politics worked. The way that they really care and they're really smart and they really struggle to come up with the right answers. And it so doesn't work like that at all. But boy, we sure wish it did. And Columbo is like detective porn. We so wish law enforcement would work like that, and that you'd have that stick-to-itiveness, somebody who was intelligent and compassionate, but was going to keep at it and figure it out. It's amazing. And the fact that he finds even the slightest, most trivial piece of evidence, that's like, there was a little burned out matchstick left outside the door, and that was what the whole case turned on.
Probably nothing. I just couldn't get any sleep last night, because I just got a problem. My wife says I got a problem. I got to put all the loose ends together. I mean, it's not. I'm not after you. I'm not accusing you of anything. It's me. It's my problem. I like consistency.
Yes. I have a friend who loves Columbo who said he was going to put together a family tree of all of the relatives Columbo mentions over the course of that series, none of whom we ever meet. And it's like, my aunt's daughter's ex-husband once told me blah, 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 blah. It's like, it's the largest television family of all time is all these relatives. But there's something deeply philosophical about Columbo. That whole idea of everyone assumes that the mystery is who did it and how they did it. But of course, the real mystery is how could justice be done here? How on earth are we going to find you and catch you? And that you could turn the whole mystery inside out and look at the world differently. It's like looking at ourselves inside out and differently to create that free will that we otherwise don't have, and to look at nature and religion and everything else the same way, to swivel the mind's eye back around, and suddenly everything looks inside out as we start to say, why did I do that? Which is a question we normally reserve for other people. It's like Kierkegaard said, the thing that we do is we treat ourselves subjectively and everybody else objectively, but the thing we need to do is to be more compassionate with everybody else and more objective about ourselves.
Yes, that's right. Right. Well put. That's right.
I think he was right on the money on that. And that art of inversion, not inverting tragically the way a tragedy does, but inverting productively to look at everything inside out, because you're correcting for the distortion of the human condition that was already seeing things inside out. And by turning them inside out, they become right side out.
Yeah, you're inverting epistemic prejudice.
Yes. Yeah. How do you judo one's own ego in order to subvert it and get some leverage against it?
That's right.
Now you're making me want to watch Columbo again. Someday, one of these things could be philosophical TV series and movies. It could literally be, we could spend the whole 2 or 3 hours just, if we prepared ahead of time, what are all of the philosophical television shows and movies that we can think of, and why? What makes them philosophical? How would they help you develop the ability to think about the world philosophically? Because most shows are a wasteland in this department. They're the opposite. They teach us not to be philosophical, but there are the occasional exceptions, and maybe that would be a way to get people started.
A general event just for that, but there are a number of movie groups on the calendar, and there's a number. I know there's a number of book people who do novels and short stories, but they happen individually. I myself do the comics one on Friday night. We've done From Hell, and we've done
From
some
Hell.
others.
That was amazing.
Beautiful Darkness this Friday.
Oh, you're saying you didn't do it in the past? You're doing it this coming Friday?
Yeah, I've never read it before. I've heard good things about it, and I want to do. So I put it on the calendar for Friday night.
Are you? So if you haven't read before, are you reading it between now and Friday, or?
Yeah, I'm going to. Yeah.
Wow. Do you like horror films?
I've heard it's dark. Yes, I've heard it's really dark.
Well, I mean, it's Jack the Ripper, right? So.
Beautiful Darkness, Rick.
Beautiful Darkness. Oh, not From Hell. You're doing Beautiful Darkness.
Beautiful Darkness.
Okay, I'm with you now. I haven't read that one.
Hey, have you guys seen Hereditary? I know it's old by now.
I have not. No.
God. No, you have. David, have you seen it?
No.
Wow. I worship horror films pretty much. My life began with my intellectual life began with The Exorcist, because I really thought it might be possible for another self to replace myself, and it scared the crap out of me. And it really, I had to see a therapist, and I was hallucinating. I saw Reagan's face on my mom's face. And then over time, I thought the only way to conquer this is to actually just get possessed and fucking deal with it. So then I bought Aleister Crowley's Magic, and I listened to Led Zeppelin backwards. And I was like, Satan, take me, Satan, take me. I was like trying to become demon possessed just to get it over with, I couldn't stand the suspense of not being ready to be possessed and then having it take me by surprise. Anyway, Hereditary's so no movies scare me. I've never seen a scary film, but Hereditary actually has a scary ending. So if you're actually interested in actually feeling the feeling you had when you were 10 and you thought these things might actually happen, what a great film!
All right. So my homework is I'm gonna watch Hereditary, and I'm gonna read Beautiful Darkness.
That's right.
That sounds good.
On Friday night.
I don't know. I got to look at my calendar and find out. Most of my evenings are with Beverly, but sometimes not.
But we did the movie group did Princess Mononoke.
It's one of my favorite films.
Really? And I think we've got another one. And there's a number of movie groups actually. I wouldn't mind doing movies, and I've talked about this with the group. I wouldn't mind doing some TV shows or books if anybody has any suggestions. There's a number of book and novel discussion groups on the calendar. Yeah,
I'll think about this. I'll think about this. That's a good idea.
I don't even mind doing more than Smith on these Monday afternoons. I don't mind doing other days either, depending
Well, he's written so much stuff. I'm really glad we're doing Smith.
Yeah, right.
Well, on that note, I got to run. I've used up my available time.
Yeah, well, we've been going for a while. All right, everyone. See you guys next week.
Thank you.
Bye. Good talking with you.
Likewise.